Chapter 386. Go to watch net. Just as the little foxes were about to swarm upstairs, Chowie suddenly scolded in a low voice, "Bastard! Do you want sect leader to suffer from chi deviation?" At this time Zhuang Yiting also stood up and glared at the little foxes. "Don't you know when to make trouble? You really have no sense of propriety." She looked at Chowie meaningfully and then at Zhuang Yiting. She nodded slightly to them and then went upstairs. She took the towel from Ruan Hongling's hand and said softly, "Give it to me. You can stay here and keep an eye on her. You don't have to close the door. Anyway, they are all women. I'm not afraid of being exposed. It's better to have some fresh air in the room. Watch net. 7 KOM. Ruan Hongling glanced at Zhou Qin, her eyes full of strong envy. She said softly, "It's true that different people have different fates. She's really lucky. She has Rinyuan Jindan to take and 2 masters to protect her. Humph, I'm not so lucky." Ziyuan pointed at Ruan Hongling's forehead with her finger, glared at her and scolded softly, "Don't you have the nerve to say that? You've been fed elixirs and drank medicinal soup since you were young. Do you think you've eaten less of these things? How heartless." Zhou Qin could take the Rinyuan Jindan because it was her destiny. As the saying goes, one's destiny, 2 are luck, 3 are geomancy, 4 are accumulating yin virtue, 5 are reading, 6 are famous and 8 are worshipping the gods. There were 10 things in life that could change a person the most. The first was fate. Some things are destined by fate and you can't force it. It's useless even if you envy it so much that you can see through it. You're a cultivator but you can't even see through this. Ruan Hongling made a face. "You think I don't know? I was just casually talking about it, yet you gave me such a long lecture. Humph, so boring." While the 2 of them were talking, Li Yundong threw another towel and shouted in a low voice, "Change." Ziyuan hurriedly threw the dry towel in her hand to Su Chan, then walked to the bathroom to change, and then dried it with her own jinchi. After repeating this dozens of times, the sweat on her body slowly stopped, and the colorful light on her body slowly weakened. At this time, not only did Li Yundong not let out a sigh of relief, but he became even more focused. He whispered in her ear and began to guide her to meditate. She began to look at her own aura and began to visualize the things in the spirit space. 2 days later, Li Yunyang helped Zhou Qin advance by leaps and bounds all the way to the advanced realm of Yin spirit, realization, and great freedom in the 3rd heaven. Only then did Zhou Qin's qi become exhausted and she fell into a deep sleep from meditation. Only then did Li Yundong let out a sigh of relief. At this time he also felt a wave of fatigue attacking him and his waist was a little stiff. Li Yundong released the hand that had been pressed against the Baihui acupoint on the top of her head, then covered her with the quilt. He put her down on the bed, tucked her in and walked out of the room. To his surprise, someone had been waiting at the door of the room for the past 2 days in case he needed any help, but at this time, there was no one at the door. When he walked out of the door and came to the corridor, Li Yundong found that everyone was in the hall, whispering anxiously about something. As soon as Li Yundong came out, he immediately attracted everyone's attention. They all looked up at him. When Ziyuan, Su Chan and Ruan Hongling saw Li Yundong, they were immediately overjoyed. Su Chan said in surprise, "Yundong, you're out? Where's Sister Zhou Qin?" Ziyuan also smiled and said, "Are you done?" Li Yundong nodded to everyone with a smile and walked down the stairs. His voice was full of exhaustion as he said, "I'm done. Zhou Qin has already fallen asleep. What are you talking about?" At this time, Su Chan's expression immediately turned from joy to worry. She took Li Yundong's hand and said anxiously, "Something happened in the store." Li Yundong was shocked and hurriedly asked, "What happened?" Ziyuan said softly, "Actually, it's nothing. Don't worry. You've been tired for 2 days. It's not too late to take a rest first." At this time, Su Chan came to her senses and thought, Yundong has been by Zhou Qin's side for 2 days and 2 nights, constantly helping her expand her meridians and guiding her cultivation. Now he's exhausted. Why can't I calm down and make him worry? The little girl also nodded and took Li Yundong's arm. "Yes, Yundong, you'd better take a rest." Li Yundong sighed slightly and said in a low voice, "I'm fine." "What happened?" Seeing that she couldn't dissuade him, Ziyuan said, "It's just that some of the documents have been blocked by someone. As for the decoration company, all the people under Mr. Han have been poached. Now they can't start the decoration anymore." Li Yundong was stunned. "Ah, what's going on?" After he finished speaking, everyone in the Fox Zen school was also talking about it. The little foxes all looked worried and looked at Li Yundong eagerly, as if they were hoping that he could come up with a good idea. Seeing that they were worried, Li Yundong winked at Ziyuan and Su Chan. Then he said to Chow Yi, Sherbua, take the disciples to practice first. I have something to say to Ziyuan and Su Chan in private. Chow Yi nodded and took the little foxes to Ziyuan's residence across the street. Li Yundong, Ziyuan, and Su Chan went to his own room. As soon as he entered, Li Yundong didn't wait for Ziyuan to close the door and asked, "Our documents have been blocked? What exactly is going on? Is there a need for documents to be verified to open a shop?" Since Zhou Qin had been in charge of this matter before, Li Yundong had given her full authority to handle it without asking any questions. At this time, Zhou Qin was sleeping, so Li Yundong didn't know what the problem was. Ziyuan explained, "To open a shop you need a business license." Li Yundong said curiously, "Didn't we get it last time? Didn't old lady Su ask her son to help us with it?" Ziyuan sighed and said, "Li Yundong, it's not that simple. Last time, old lady Su mainly helped us solve the problem of the storefront and rent, but it's not that simple to get a business license. To get a business license you first need a storefront, then you need all kinds of documents as well as the lease contract from the Housing Administration Bureau." At this time, Su Chan also interrupted and said, "Last time, Sister Zhou Qin went to get the lease contract from the Housing Administration Bureau, right?" Ziyuan nodded and said, "Yes, in short, we need the original and copy of the business license, the code certificate, the land tax certificate, the national tax certificate, the account opening permits." Li Yundong felt a headache coming on. "Wait, how can there be so many things? I thought Zhou Qin had settled everything last time." Ziyuan shook her head and sighed helplessly. "Don't you know where you are? This is China. Don't you know that these officials are waiting for these things to torture you? I haven't finished yet. We need a health permit from the Health Bureau to open a tea house. And the most important thing, which is also the biggest problem they've been choking us with, is, we need to have a bank account. This bank account contains our registered capital." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "It's crazy. It's so troublesome to open a shop. Just listening to it gives me a headache. How much does the registered capital cost?" Ziyuan said, "At least 1 million. Li Yundong took a breath of cold air. 1 million? *CK, where can I get 1 million at this time?" Ziyuan said helplessly, "In fact, this is not a rigid rule. The standard for the fluctuation of registered capital is very high, but now someone wants to mess with us, so the Industry and Commerce Bureau set the standard very high." Li Yundong said angrily, "Who stabbed us in the back? It can't be Director Wang, can it?" Ziyuan shook her head and said, "I don't think so. I called him before and asked him what was going on. He said that someone above wanted to mess with us and he couldn't do anything about it." Li Yundong asked, "Did he say who wanted to mess with us?" Ziyuan said, "He didn't dare to say, but I can probably guess." Li Yundong quickly asked, "Who is it?" Ziyuan sighed and said, "Li Yundong, think about it. You have offended so many sects before, and these sects are more or less powerful. Moreover, now that the country has relaxed the management of the cultivation world has begun to spread and expand into the business and political circles again. Officials and businessmen can collude together, so why can't officials and cultivators collude together? You have to know what officials are most afraid of? They are most afraid of death and old age. And what are cultivators best at? It's good for health and prolonging one's life." Li Yundong suddenly understood and said, "I see. No wonder Taoist Li Yi made such a big noise a while ago. Qigong masters, national treasures and famous doctors were all favored by countless rich businessmen and high officials. It turns out that this is the reason." Ziyuan said, "You have offended so many sects before. Although they don't dare to make trouble for you openly, if you want to open a shop in the secular world, they will have countless ways to deal with you. For example, one of them is to block your neck during the approval of the certificate." Li Yundong snorted coldly and said, "What about the decoration company? Is this also the doing of these guys?" Ziyuan said, "I don't know about that." Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "I'll go to the shop now and see what's going on." Ziyuan said, "Okay, I'll go with you." Su Chan also smiled crisply and said, "I'll go too." Li Yundong saw the playful smile on the little girl's face and felt relieved, as if what he had heard before was just a trivial matter. Li Yundong pinched the tip of the little girl's nose with a smile and said, "How can you still laugh? Aren't you worried?" The little girl held Li Yundong's arm and said coquettishly, "What's there to worry about? Last night on Mount Gizao, you made it through such a dangerous situation. My Yundong will definitely be able to turn misfortune into blessing and turn the situation around." Li Yundong laughed and said, "You're right. There will be a way out when we get to the mountain. There's nothing to worry about." The group of people went out and took a taxi to the pedestrian street. When they arrived at the shop, Li Yundong saw at a glance that the shop, which had already started construction, was in a mess. There were debris everywhere, especially a small part of the wall that had been smashed, revealing a twisted steel bar, which was particularly dazzling. Ziyuan frowned slightly. She looked around and said, "I called Mr. Han before. He said that he wanted to recruit someone else, but it would take a long time. I'm afraid that we won't be able to open this shop for a while." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Are there no other decoration companies?" At this time, Ziyuan said even more helplessly, "I have already contacted several decoration companies in Tianan City, but they are all busy now." Li Yundong was tongue-tied. "It can't be such a coincidence, can it?" Ziyuan said, "Someone must be playing tricks behind the scenes. Otherwise, it can't be such a coincidence." Li Yundong was about to speak when he suddenly heard the door of the shop being pushed open. An arrogant and harsh voice rang out, "Hey little brother, you're here. Haha, how is the decoration of the shop going?" When Li Yundong heard this, he turned around and saw a middle-aged man holding two coquettish women in his arms, looking at him arrogantly. Who else could it be but Zhao Yujian? Well, I accidentally found a picture that looked like a character in this book, so I asked Ziny and Coriander to make it the cover. You can guess which character it is. Chapter 387. Go to WatchNet. As soon as Li Yundong saw Zhao Yujian, his eyebrows furrowed and he said sarcastically, "Mr. Zhao, what brings you here? Don't you need to drink with others?" Zhao Yujian didn't seem to hear Li Yundong's sarcastic tone at all. He smiled proudly, pinched the butt of the pointy-faced beauty next to him, and said with a grin, "As a neighbor, of course I have to come over and say hello to my little brother." When Su Chan saw Zhao Yujian, she didn't hide the disgust on her face. However, the little girl had been dealing with people in the mortal world for a long time, and she had gradually become more careful. Especially when she was with Li Yundong, the little girl had learned not to rush to talk and not to cause trouble for Li Yundong because of her words and deeds. WatchNet. 7 KOM. Su Chan tugged at his arm and whispered, "Yundong, this man is so annoying. Do you want me to drive him away?" Li Yundong squeezed Su Chan's hand and winked at her. "It's okay," he said in a low voice. "I'll do it. Don't speak." Li Yundong turned his face and said to Zhao Yujian in a deep voice, "Neighbors? What neighbor?" Zhao Yujian pointed to a shop across the street and said with a laugh, "Haven't you noticed? I, your big brother, have opened a shop across the street and I happen to be doing business with you." Only then did Li Yundong find that there were some people busy decorating the shop across the street. At this time, Ziyuan suddenly sent a voice transmission to Li Yundong and said, "Li Yundong, I know these decoration workers. They used to work for Mr. Han." Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, then became furious. He glared at Zhao Yujian and said, "Did you poach the renovation workers for our shop?" Zhao Yogan's heart skipped a beat when he was glared at by Li Yundong. It was as if an invisible hand had squeezed his heart hard, causing all the blood in his body to rush to his face. His face suddenly turned red as a pig's liver. He couldn't help but take a step back, but he quickly gritted his teeth and stood still. He raised his head and said in a strange tone, "Hey little brother, look at what you're saying. TSK, you're being unreasonable. The renovation workers also came out to eat. Of course they would go wherever the salary was higher. Besides, I only gave them a high salary. How could I have known that they were working for you?" Li Yundong saw that his tone was full of provocation, and he was furious in his heart. He raised his eyebrows and immediately clenched his fists tightly. Seeing that the situation was not good, Ziyuan immediately transmitted her voice to him, "Li Yundong, don't be impulsive. This was the mortal world. Everything could not be solved by force. Didn't you see how fearless he was and how he was waiting for you to hit him? He definitely has a trap waiting for you to jump into. Don't foolishly dive into it. That's the bravery of an ignorant man." Since Li Yundong had started cultivating, he had experienced many things. He was no longer the young man who would be impulsive and angry when he encountered something. Especially since he had succeeded as the leader of the Fox Zen school, Li Yundong had grown at an astonishing speed. After hearing Ziyuan's words, he immediately calmed down and said calmly, "Oh? Is that so? Then I was wrong about you, Mr. Zhao. However, as a star entrepreneur in Tianan City, what kind of shop did you open here? Is such a small business worth your time?" Seeing that Li Yundong was angry first and then laughing, Mr. Zhao's heart suddenly trembled. It seemed that he didn't believe that this young man, who was young and vigorous in his impression, could swallow the anger in front of him. He snorted in his heart and said to Li Yundong with a fake smile, "Not at all. I heard that you want to open a tea shop for fun, so I was also interested in it. I was curious and wanted to open a tea shop to play with you." When Li Yundong heard this, he smiled sarcastically and said, "Oh, Mr. Zhao, you also want to open a tea shop? Not everyone can open a tea shop. Mr. Zhao, do you know anything about tea? Don't mess it up." Zhao Yuzhen smiled proudly and said, "Can't I open a tea shop if I don't know anything about tea? If I don't know, I can ask those who do. Anyway, I have too much money to spend. If I mess it up, I can just close down and open another shop. This bit of money to your big brother, TSK, it's just a drop in the bucket, not worth mentioning. But you have to be careful, little brother. If your shop is ruined, it won't be easy to clean up." Li Yundong sneered and said, "Mr. Zhao, you know me very well. It seems that I'm destined to fight with you." Zhao Yuzhen hugged the women around him and said with an arrogant smile, "Little brother, you've gone too far. I was just playing. I didn't mean to challenge you to a duel. However, as the saying goes, there are no fathers and sons in the casino, and there are no brothers in the business world. I call you brother now, but when the shop opens, I won't show any mercy. However, I am a generous person. If one day you are desperate and have no food to eat, you can come to me. I, Zhao Yuzhen, will definitely give you a bowl of rice to eat." When Li Yundong heard this, he raised his head and laughed. His laughter was loud and sonorous, revealing a sense of pride and anger. It was like a tiger roaring in the mountains or a lion roaring in the wilderness. Li Yundong's jinchi was strong, and the door of the shop was closed, forming a closed space. Li Yundong's laughter immediately echoed in the shop, causing Zhao Yogan's eardrums to hurt and his brain to buzz. The two prostitutes who had come with him also covered their ears in pain. Su Chan and Zi Yuan were cultivators. They acted as if nothing had happened to Li Yundong's laughter and looked at Zhao Yuzhen and the others with sarcasm. A sharp-faced woman beside Zhao Yuzhen couldn't stand it anymore and shouted, "Stop laughing. My eardrums are going to burst." But as soon as her voice came out of her throat, it was immediately drowned out by Li Yundong's voice, as if a small boat was quickly drowned by stormy waves. After enduring for a while, President Zhao finally couldn't stand it anymore. He covered his ears with both hands, his face full of pain, and his body was on the verge of collapse. At this time, the door of the shop was suddenly opened, and 4 or 5 people in police uniforms rushed in and shouted, "What happened?" As the door was pulled open, Li Yundong immediately stopped laughing and looked at the policeman who had come in coldly. One of the leading policemen said to Zhao Yuzhen with a flattering smile, "President Zhao, what's wrong with you? Did these fellows offend you in any way? Do you want me to arrest them for you?" Li Yundong sneered in his heart. He glanced at Zi Yuan and thought to himself, "Zi Yuan is right. Zhao Yuzhen really has a trap waiting for me to jump into." At this time Su Chan said loudly, "Hey, you people are unreasonable. Can't you see that my Yundong is so far away from your President Zhao? Don't make irresponsible remarks and confuse black and white." The leading policeman turned his head and was about to scold her with a sneer, but he saw Su Chan at a glance. His eyes suddenly bulged and he almost drooled. He looked so stupid that he couldn't say a word. Zhao Yuzhen saw that the policemen were so shocked that they couldn't speak after seeing Su Chan and Zi Yuan. He snorted coldly in his heart and gritted his teeth. "I'm fine. You guys go out first." Only then did the policemen wake up as if they had just woken up from a dream. They obediently went out of the door and looked back 3 times. After they went out, they refused to leave and stared at Su Chan through the transparent glass window of the shop. Zhao Yuzhen glanced at Li Yundong with malicious eyes and said, "Little brother, I hope you can laugh like this in the future." After that, he pulled the 2 beautiful women beside him who had not yet recovered and was about to go out. Seeing that he was about to leave, Li Yundong snorted and said coldly, "President Zhao, don't be in such a hurry to leave. I still have something to say." Zhao Yuzhen turned around and said coldly, "What is it?" Li Yundong snorted coldly and said, "President Zhao, since you are broad-minded, I naturally can't be narrow-minded. If one day you have nowhere to go, you can come to my shop and be a customer. Although I don't think I'm Lord Mengchang, I'm not Fan Zhu, who will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. I still have the ability to support a few thieves." Zhao Yogan's face suddenly turned red. He snorted and said, "Young man, don't be so arrogant. Be careful or I'll make your shop close down in less than 3 months." Li Yundong was furious, but there was always a faint sneer on his face. He said, "If you're old, you should take care of yourself. Don't come out to show off. I promise you that within 3 months I will uproot you. I'll make you worse than a stray dog on the side of the road." "Well, you have guts. Zhao Yuzhen suddenly became furious. He gritted his teeth and stamped his feet. Ignoring the two women beside him, he turned around and rushed out of the shop. The two beautiful women, who were dressed very well, suddenly looked at each other awkwardly and then secretly glanced at Li Yundong. They had seen that Li Yundong had been provoked and humiliated by Zhao Yuzhen again and again. Although he had been angry, he had been able to control his emotions. Not only had he been able to control himself, but his tongue had also been like a knife. In turn, he had humiliated and satirized Zhao Yuzhen and made him lose his composure. Not to mention anything else, just his ability to control himself and his bearing were far better than all the peers they had ever seen. He was even calmer than some successful people who looked glamorous on the surface. In particular, Li Yundong stood where he was. He was dignified without being angry, revealing an imposing manner that was difficult for others to match. Su Chan and Zi Yuan stood on either side of him, like stars surrounding the moon. For a moment, the two women who were used to the world did not dare to retreat. They stood there at a loss, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. Li Yundong saw that the two of them were embarrassed and embarrassed. Although he despised their degenerate behavior, he also sympathized with their current situation, so he shouted, "What are you still doing standing here? Do you want me to treat you to dinner?" Only then did the two women escape from the shop as if they had been granted amnesty. After they got out of the shop, they looked around, but Zhao Yuzhen was nowhere to be seen. The pointy-faced woman immediately cursed, "Is this B***** still a man? He's really a B*****. How could he leave us two weak women there? F****, Xiao, you son of a B****T. You have no anus when you give birth. God will punish you sooner or later." The round-faced woman's character was more gentle. She persuaded helplessly, "Forget it. It's not the first time you know his character and temper. Aren't we just trying to make money?" The pointy-faced woman spat fiercely on the ground and said, "What the hell? You don't have the ability, so you take it out on us." The round-faced woman sighed and slowly walked along the pedestrian street with the pointy-faced woman in her arms. As she walked, she said faintly, "Who asked us to be prostitutes? Who would be serious about a prostitute? Alas, in fact, the road is also chosen by oneself. When I was in college, my boyfriend was very good to me, but he was too poor. At that time, I thought he didn't have the ability to support me, so I kicked him out. As a result, I walked on this road myself. In the past, I used to think that relying on a tycoon was very impressive and gave me face. And now it seems that those tycoons don't even see us as humans. They just treat us as playthings. Just like today, they throw us away and abandon us as they please." The pointy-faced woman's beautiful eyes flashed with resentment and hatred. She gritted her teeth and said, "Humph, don't let this Zhao fall into my hands one day, otherwise." Seeing the fierce light in her eyes, the round-faced woman was shocked and quickly persuaded, "Don't be silly. Why should we, weak women, fight with him? Why don't you just let him fight with that boy surnamed Li? I think this handsome guy surnamed Li is definitely not an ordinary person. Mr. Zhao may not be able to defeat him." The pointy-faced woman sneered and said, "Nonsense. That guy surnamed Zhao only knows how to bully the weak and fear the strong. He can't even compare to a hair of this handsome guy. Humph, if this handsome guy wants me, I'll immediately take my dowry and go to him." The round-faced woman sneered and said, "Don't joke around. Don't you see that the two best girls around him are still virgins? He doesn't even want to eat these two, so why would he want leftovers like us?" The pointy-faced woman was furious at first. She glared fiercely at her companion beside her, but she soon softened like a deflated balloon. She sighed faintly and said, "Sigh, if I could spend a night with this handsome guy, I'd be willing to shorten my life by 10 years. As soon as she finished speaking, Zhao Yuzhen suddenly appeared beside her like a ghost and said coldly, "What did you just say?" Although the pointy-faced woman and the round-faced woman were cursing Zhao Yuzhen in private and gnashing their teeth with hatred, they had been by Zhao Yogen's side for a long time. When they suddenly saw Zhao Yuzhen, they were so scared that they couldn't speak. Seeing that Zhao Yogen's eyes were full of malice and resentment, the pointy-faced woman subconsciously covered her face with her hand and shouted, "Don't hit my face, don't hit my face." Zhao Yuzhen knocked her to the ground with a punch and roared, "Bitch, isn't your face the only valuable thing? If I don't hit your face, where should I hit? F***ck, let go of your hand. I'll beat you to death. If you disfigure me, I'll pay you back." The pointy-faced woman curled up into a ball and covered her face with her hands, ignoring Zhao Yogen's punches and kicks. The round-faced woman cried and begged, "Mr. Zhao, please stop. You're going to kill me." Some passers-by couldn't stand it anymore and scolded, "Hey, how can you hit a woman?" Zhao Yuzhen suddenly turned his head, and his eyes were bloodshot. He roared, "I don't need you to care if I hit my own woman." The onlookers saw that he was arrogant and his expression was terrible. For a moment, no one dared to dissuade him. Seeing that she couldn't dissuade him, the round-faced woman suddenly threw herself on the pointy-faced woman and cried, "Mr. Zhao, if you want to hit someone, hit me. Don't hit her anymore. If you hit her again she will really die." Zhao Yuzhen was so angry that he kicked the round-faced woman in the face, making her face bleed. He said angrily, "You two shameless bitches, get out of here. I don't want to see you again." After that, he snorted angrily and left. After a long time, the two women who had collapsed on the cold ground slowly got up and supported each other. Under the pointing of the crowd, they limped away, leaving only a pool of blood and cold eyes. Today, I'll go back to Shenzhen and update in advance. Chapter 388. Go to WatchNet. After Zhao Yuzhen and the others left, Su Chan spat at Zhao Yogan's figure with a look of disgust. "What a nasty fly," she said. Ziyuan sighed slightly at Li Yundong and said, "In fact, this kind of person can be ignored. There's no need to quarrel with him. Go to WatchNet." 7 km. Li Yundong snorted coldly. "Who's quarreling with him? This guy clearly wants to crush my shop. If he doesn't give me a way out, why should I be polite to him? I let him go last time, but I didn't expect this guy to be so reckless and dare to provoke me again. If I can take this lying down, won't anyone be able to bully me? If cultivators live like turtles, what kind of cultivators are they?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "I've never seen a cultivator like you in the entire cultivation world. Forget it, let's not talk about this anymore. As the saying goes, if it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, it can't be avoided. Since President Zhao wants to make life difficult for us, let him come." Li Yundong laughed and said, "That's right." Ziyuan shook her head and said with a smile, "You should solve the decoration problem of our shop first." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Without Butcher Zhang, do I have to eat pig with hair? Are you kidding me? I have a way. Don't worry." Su Chan's eyes widened and she asked curiously, "Yundong, what way do you have?" Li Yundong's face was mysterious. "The secret of heaven can't be revealed." He waved his hand and said loudly, "Let's go home. I'm going to hold a temporary meeting." After that, Li Yundong turned around and left the shop. Ziyuan and Su Chan looked at each other, shook their heads at the same time and chased after him. After returning home, Li Yundong saw Ruan Hongling at a glance and immediately asked with concern, "How is Zhou Qin?" Ruan Hongling curled her lips and said, "Renyuan Jin Dan is attacking the meridians, and there are two masters carefully serving her. What else can she do?" Seeing Ruan Hongling's jealousy, Li Yundong laughed and said, "Come on, don't be jealous. I won't forget you if there are benefits in the future." Ruan Hongling jumped up like a rabbit whose tail had been stepped on. "Who's jealous? As a direct disciple of the Linggong sect, I have taken countless elixirs since I was a child. Why should I be jealous of a rookie who hasn't even started cultivating?" Li Yundong deliberately sighed and said, "Alas, you've eaten countless elixirs and miraculous medicines since you were a child, but your cultivation level is only at this level?" Ruan Hongling was instantly furious. She jumped 30 feet high, put her hands on her hips and said angrily, "Li Yundong, what did you say? If you don't explain yourself clearly today, I won't let you off. What do you mean by this little bit of cultivation? Do you think everyone is as perverted as you?" Seeing that Ruan Hongling was angry, Li Yundong smiled and said, "I was just joking with you. Don't take it so seriously." Ziyuan also advised, "Hongling, can't you just tell us how Zhou Qin is?" Ruan Hongling glared at him. "She's not dead. Are you satisfied?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "What a strong smell of gunpowder." Su Chan rolled her eyes and tried to smooth things over. She volunteered and said, "I'll go and have a look." After that, she jumped upstairs lightly, stretched her head out, and opened the door to take a look inside. Then she made a gesture to Li Yundong and said softly, "She's sleeping soundly." Li Yundong nodded and lowered his voice. He said, "Well, call the others. Let's go to Ziyuan's place for a meeting. I have something to say." Su Chan nodded and called the others out one by one in the room. Ruan Hongling rolled her eyes and said angrily, "Meeting? Do you think you're the president of the student union?" Li Yundong was not angry. He said with a smile, "You don't have to come." Ruan Hongling said with an exaggerated expression, "That's great. Thank God." Li Yundong added unhurriedly, "In that case I will assign you any tasks and work. I will take your absence as your acceptance of my arrangements." Ruan Hongling said angrily, What tasks and work? Do you think you're an unscrupulous boss who can squeeze the remaining labor value of his employees at will? Li Yundong laughed and said with a fake smile, you did a good job in politics. I'm going over. Don't come to the meeting later. As he said this, he walked to the residence opposite Ziyuan's. Because Li Yundong and Ziyuan had exchanged a key when they had first moved in, Li Yundong took out the key and pushed the door open. Ruan Hongling looked at Li Yundong's back and stomped her feet in anger. She took Ziyuan's hand and said angrily, Sister Ziyuan, look, this guy is bullying me again. Why don't you help me? Ziyuan rubbed her temples with a headache. Can't you guys stop arguing? Ruan Hongling said angrily, it's not that I want to quarrel. It's him who wants to make things difficult for me. Ziyuan said helplessly, why didn't you answer him honestly from the beginning? Why did you have to beat around the bush? Ruan Hongling snorted. I don't want to talk nicely when I see him. Ziyuan sighed and shook her head. Then there's nothing I can do. Ruan Hongling saw the little foxes of the Fox Zen school come out of their rooms curiously and excitedly. One by one they ran to the living room of Ziyuan's residence. She rolled her eyes and pulled Ziyuan aside, whispering, Sister Ziyuan, why don't you not go to that damn meeting? Ziyuan looked at Ruan Hongling as if she was looking at an ignorant 3-year-old child. She didn't say a word. Ruan Hongling was a little scared by Ziyuan's gaze. She stamped her feet and said, well, tell me which side you're on. Are you on the side of your shimmy who has been with you since you were a child, or are you on the side of this bastard? Ziyuan was still silent. Her eyes became more and more sympathetic, as if she was looking at an ignorant 2-year-old child. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but say frantically, I know, you've always been on this guy's side. You've been doing this ever since you heard that he is the successor of Jin Dan. I'm really the biggest fool in the world. How could I ask you this question? After that, she rushed to the living room of her residence angrily and then sat down on the sofa angrily. At this time, the little foxes of the Fox Zen school were excitedly whispering to each other, trying to guess what Li Yundong was going to say next. But when they suddenly saw Ruan Hongling rush in, they were all shocked and whispered, what's wrong with her? Su Chan also tugged at Li Yundong's sleeve and whispered, Yundong, did you quarrel with her again? Li Yundong said with an aggrieved expression, I didn't. Su Chan blinked her eyes and said, then why is she so angry? Li Yundong winked and said, women have a few days in a month. You know. Su Chan burst into laughter. You're so annoying. She's a cultivator. Female cultivators after the Zhuji phase don't have menstruation. Ruan Hongling saw Li Yundong and Su Chan looking at her, talking and laughing. She immediately stood up, raised her eyebrows and said loudly, what are you guys talking about? If you have the guts, say it out loud. Li Yundong smiled and said, we're talking about the problem of female cultivators not having menstruation after reaching the Zhuji phase. Ruan Hongling finally seized an opportunity and sneered, menstruation means that female cultivators have a leaky body. You have to cultivate a leaky body before you can successfully reach the Zhuji phase. If you don't understand this, how do you cultivate? Li Yundong tried hard to hold back his laughter and said, have you succeeded in the Zhuji phase? Ruan Hongling said angrily, nonsense. If I hadn't reached the Zhuji phase, how would I have the spiritual energy? Li Yundong finally couldn't help laughing. But I saw that you were angry just now, just like a woman on her period. I thought that you hadn't succeeded in the Zhuji phase, or that you were a special kind of cultivator who still had a period after the Zhuji phase. As soon as he said this, everyone in the Fox Zen school burst out laughing. Ruan Hongling was ashamed and angry at the same time. She shouted, Li Yundong, if you have the guts, say it again. However, Li Yundong held his stomach and laughed. Ruan Hongling was furious. She saw that Ziyuan was the last to enter the living room. She immediately pointed at Li Yundong and said loudly, Sister Ziyuan, look, your lover only knows how to bully me. In an instant, the laughter in the living room stopped abruptly. Everyone looked at Ruan Hongling in shock, and then followed her finger to look at Ziyuan. Everyone in the Fox Zen school looked at Ziyuan strangely. They all thought in their hearts, I've always wondered why Jinren Ziyuan of the Linggong sect helped the leader. Now I finally understand. It turns out that Jinren Ziyuan likes the leader. The leader's charm is too great. Amazing. Ziyuan hadn't expected Ruan Hongling to blurt out such a sentence. Her face suddenly turned red, and she glared at Ruan Hongling with shame and anger. She shouted, have you taken the wrong medicine? Her sharp gaze immediately made Ruan Hongling's heart tremble. She knew that she had said something wrong, so she immediately lowered her head and sat down. Her lips wriggled and she muttered silently, I didn't say anything wrong. You only know how to be mean to me. Li Yundong saw Ziyuan standing at the entrance of the door. It was rare for her to be at a loss. If there was a crack in the ground, Ziyuan would immediately crawl into it. He quickly coughed dryly and said loudly, "Everyone sit down. Today the first Congress of the Fox Zen School is officially held." Silence, a deathly silence. Li Yundong looked around awkwardly, then glared at Su Chan, who was also staring at him without any reaction. Clap. Why are you in a daze? Only then did the little girl wake up as if from a dream. She clapped her hands vigorously, and the little foxes of the Fox Zen School also followed suit and applauded. A burst of sparse applause diluted a lot of the embarrassment. Li Yundong smiled dryly and said to Ziyuan, who was frozen in place, "Jinren Ziyuan, would you like to sit next to me?" Ziyuan finally found a way out. She glared at Li Yundong and shouted, "Who wants to sit with you?" After that, she turned her head and sat down on the sofa with Ruan Hongling. When Ruan Hongling saw Ziyuan sitting down, she was immediately overjoyed. But when she looked up, she saw Ziyuan looking at her with a murderous expression. Ruan Hongling shivered all over and lowered her head again, almost burying it in her chest. The little foxes secretly looked at Ziyuan and whispered to each other. The sound of rustling in the living room was endless. At this time, Li Yundong finally understood what it was like to be a teacher. There were only a dozen people in the living room, and only Su Chan was looking at him eagerly. The three seniors of the Fox Zen School, Chao Yi, Lu Yuehong, and Zhuang Yiting, were still sitting upright. The others were all thinking about what to do. Li Yundong cleared his throat and said seriously, "In view of some things that have happened recently, I have decided to hold a meeting. Since this is the first meeting since I took charge of the work of the Fox Zen School, I have decided to be solemn and respectful." As he said this, Li Yundong said to Su Chan, "Chaner, you will be the clerk and be responsible for taking notes of the meeting." Su Chan responded excitedly and ran back to her residence. She took a pen from Li Yundong's room and then ran back. But when she came back, she found that she didn't have any paper with her. She stuck out her tongue and quickly ran back, took a notebook and then ran back like a gust of wind. Li Yundong watched helplessly as Su Chan ran back and forth twice to settle the matter. He shook his head and said to Chao Yi and the others, "Chao Yi Sherbua, you are responsible for the discipline of the meeting." Chao Yi and the others didn't know what Li Yundong was up to, so they could only nod with a chuckle. The little foxes loved to be lively. Their attention was finally diverted from Ziyuan by Li Yundong. They were all in high spirits and looked at Li Yundong expectantly, as if he was going to announce some great news in the next second. Seeing that everyone's attention was finally focused on him, Li Yundong didn't beat around the bush. He coughed dryly and said, "A few things happened today. I won't talk about the others that are not important. The most important thing is that our shop can no longer be renovated because the workers of the decoration company have been poached by our enemy." Before Li Yundong could finish his words, the little foxes shouted angrily, "Who? How dare he poach our people? Scold him. What's the use of scolding him? I think we should scold his whole family. Yes, including his 18 generations of ancestors. Bah, what's the use of scolding people? If you ask me, we should do it for real." "Wow, fourth Shiji, are you going to kill someone? If a cultivator kills someone, they will be punished by heaven. Damn, who wants to kill someone? I'm so beautiful and smart. Why would I do such a terrible thing like killing someone?" "Then, fourth Shiji, what do you want?" "Humph, if you ask me, find this person's birth date and hair, then make a paper man, then a straw man, nail him and curse him. Yes. Curse him for the rest of his life. You bunch of good-for-nothings, do you dare to do anything to a real person? If you ask me, let's find a dark and windy night, put a sack over his head and give him a good beating. Beat him until his mother's mother doesn't recognize him." His mother's mother? Isn't that his grandmother? What if his grandmother has never seen him before? Idiot. The first thing I said was a dirty word. Don't you understand? I'm talking about beating him until his grandmother doesn't recognize him. Second Shiji is really smart. You're really smart. That's not right. This sentence seems to be two vulgarities. Look, it's his mother and his grandmother, of course. Just understand what I mean. Why are you so serious? The meeting had just begun and Li Yundong had only said one sentence, but the little foxes were already talking excitedly. The meeting had already slipped into an uncontrollable abyss. Li Yundong felt a headache coming on, and his temples began to throb. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly heard the little girl add excitedly, "If you ask me, I'll kick his balls." Damn. Li Yundong immediately went crazy and turned his head to glare at Su Chan. The little foxes also fell silent and looked at Su Chan in surprise. The little girl had been proud and excited at first, but when she saw everyone looking at her strangely, she immediately shrank her head back and said weakly, I was just suggesting. Before she could finish her words, the little foxes suddenly said in unison, "Yes, kick his balls." Li Yundong burst into tears. He thought to himself, what the hell, is it so difficult to have a meeting? Chapter 389. Go to WatchNet. After the little foxes shouted in unison, Su Chan poked her head out like a sunny day after a storm. She said with a proud and excited face, "Really? Do you also think my idea is good?" The little foxes nodded in unison. "That's a great idea." Su Chan was overjoyed. She turned her head and was about to ask Li Yundong for credit, but when she saw his black face and countless blue veins on his forehead, her heart suddenly skipped a beat and her head drooped little by little. Like a little wife who had done something wrong, she rubbed the corners of her clothes with both hands and said timidly, I was just saying it casually." Li Yundong's face darkened. He pointed at the notebook and paper on the dining table. "Do what you need to do." She lowered her head, looking aggrieved and nervous. Her eyes darted around and from time to time she peeked at Li Yundong. When she saw Li Yundong looking at her, she quickly withdrew her gaze, like a frightened deer. WatchNet. 7 KOM. Seeing Su Chan's expression, Li Yundong was both angry and amused. He said to the little foxes with a straight face, "Did I say everything just now for nothing? Do I, the sect leader, still keep my word?" Although his words were directed at the little foxes, they were actually meant for Chao Yi and the others to hear. Chao Yi quickly stood up to maintain order and said loudly, "All of you, be quiet and listen to leader." After that, she turned to Li Yundong and said with an apologetic smile, "Leader, please continue." Li Yundong saw that the other people had strange expressions on their faces, as if they wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. He was depressed in his heart, but it was not appropriate for him to lose his temper. He could only laugh and continue, "Now, I will temporarily announce the first rule of the meeting in the future. Before speaking you must raise your hand first. The host of the meeting is not allowed to speak without permission. Otherwise why would it be so chaotic?" Ruan Hongling snorted and muttered in a low voice, "Dictatorship." Unexpectedly, Li Yundong glared at him. "Even if you want to scold someone you have to raise your hand for approval first." Ruan Hongling was furious. She raised her hand high and gritted her teeth. Li Yundong acted as if he hadn't seen it. He said slowly, "Now I'll announce the second rule of the meeting. As the host of the meeting he has the right to choose to ignore the speaker." Ruan Hongling was so angry that she pointed at Li Yundong with her hands on her hips and said, "You are too overbearing." Li Yundong still said seriously, "Please raise your hand before you speak." Ruan Hongling raised her hand high again. Li Yundong immediately said, "Continue to ignore her." "You." Ruan Hongling was so angry that she almost fainted. The little foxes of the Fox Zen school couldn't help giggling. Chao Yi Zhuang Yiting and Lu Yuehong also had strange expressions on their faces. The corners of their mouths twitched as if they were trying to hold back their laughter. Su Chan, who had been pressing her head down, burst into laughter, but she quickly covered her mouth with her hands and glanced at him timidly. Seeing that he wasn't paying attention to her, she felt relieved and tried to sneak a smile. Ruan Hongling was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She sat down and gritted her teeth as if she couldn't wait to fry Li Yundong and chew him hard. Li Yundong casually picked up a spoon and used it as a gavel. He knocked on the table and attracted everyone's attention again. He said, "Attention everyone. Now let's get down to business. Someone robbed us of our decoration workers, and now we can't find a decoration master in the entire Tianan city. What do you think we should do?" Everyone looked at each other and didn't say a word. Seeing that they were all silent, Li Yundong pretended to be angry and said, "You were so enthusiastic just now. Why aren't you talking now?" At this time Chao Yi raised her hand weakly. Li Yundong quickly said, "Chao Yi Shibwa, do you have something to say?" Chao Yi said tentatively, "Leader, if we can't find a decoration master, can we not decorate, save a sum of money and make do with it?" Li Yundong looked like he was about to collapse. He asked, "Then if the Taoist temple where the Fox Zen school is located is to be changed into a temple, can we let the monks live in it for a while?" Chao Yi smiled dryly. "I was just saying." Li Yundong shook his head helplessly and said to the others, "Do you have any other ideas?" Everyone in the Fox Zen school was a master who couldn't do anything right. Li Yundong's words were no different from asking for advice from the blind. The foxes, big and small, looked at each other and shook their heads like a rattled drum. In fact, Li Yundong was just putting on a show. He didn't expect the troublemakers of the Fox Zen school to come up with any good ideas. He straightened his face and said, "Since no one has a good idea, I'll tell you my idea." Ruan Hongling, who had been sulking, couldn't help but snort again. "Why didn't you just say your idea earlier? Why are you beating around the bush?" Li Yundong glared at her and said, "Raise your hand." Ruan Hongling raised her hand, and Li Yundong immediately said, "Ignore it again." This time Ruan Hongling didn't even have the strength to be angry. She just rolled her eyes. Seeing that the non-violent and uncooperative miss was finally no longer naughty, Li Yundong coughed again and said, "My idea is to do it myself and have enough food and clothing." "Do it ourselves?" Everyone was shocked at the same time. Ziyuan, who had been struggling with Ruan Hongling's lover, had not been in the mood for a meeting, but at this time she said with a surprised face, "Do you mean that we should decorate it ourselves?" Ruan Hongling opened her mouth wide and said, "I always thought that there was a limit to your arrogance, but I didn't expect you to be so arrogant. You're the one who's going crazy, don't drag us into it." Su Chan also raised her head and said tongue-tied, "Yundong, we don't know how to decorate it." The little foxes looked at each other. "Do it ourselves? What do you mean? Are we going out to work? What kind of work? Is it fun?" "It doesn't matter whether it's fun or not. As long as we can go out. It's so boring to stay in the house all day long." At this time, the little foxes reached a consensus. "As long as we can go out and play, it doesn't matter what we do." Their eyes lit up and they nodded in unison. Okay. Leader, what are we going to do?" Seeing that the room was in chaos again, Li Yundong hurriedly knocked on the glass table with a spoon and shouted, "Silence. Raise your hands. Remember to raise your hands." Everyone immediately shut up and looked at Li Yundong in unison. Li Yundong said with a serious face, "Why is it difficult to decorate? Why do I feel that it's nothing more than carpentry, masonry and some decoration and design work? The most difficult thing in the world is cultivation. Is decoration more difficult than cultivation? Which one of you is not a cultivator? Which one of you is not confident? Stand up and speak up." Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. No one was willing to stand up and admit it. They all shook their heads. Li Yundong said again, "Since you also admit this, then it's easy to talk about it. I'll arrange the work later to ensure that everyone can make the best use of their talents." These words made Su Chan, Ziyuan, Ruan Hongling and the others curious. Su Chan secretly poked Li Yundong's arm with a pen and whispered, "Yundong, give me a good job later." Unexpectedly, Li Yundong glared at her indifferently and said, "Raise your hands." Su Chan raised her hand with an aggrieved expression. Only then did Li Yundong nod with satisfaction. "Go ahead." The little girl said eagerly, "Can you give me a good job later?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Okay, I'll arrange it." When the little foxes heard this, they immediately clamored, "It's not fair. We also want a good job." Li Yundong shouted, "What are you arguing about? I have my own arrangements." Chao Yi and the other two Sherbas also shouted, "Don't quarrel. Listen to the leader's arrangements. It won't be too late to quarrel if the arrangements are not good." What are you talking about?" Li Yundong looked at Chao Yi and the other two Sherbas speechlessly. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Ruan Hongling raise her hand high with a bitter look on her face. It was as if she would immediately pounce on Li Yundong and perish together with him if he didn't call her. Li Yundong had no choice but to say, "Hongling, what do you want to say? You don't have to swear." Ruan Hongling snorted and said loudly, "Do you think I'm like you? I just want to ask, I'm not a member of the Fox Zen school. Can I not get involved in this matter?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Okay. But if this shop makes money in the future, you won't get a single cent." Ruan Hongling said proudly, "It doesn't matter. Sister Ziyuan has shares and can get a share of the money. I'll ask her for it." After that, she turned her face and said with a complacent smile, "Sister Ziyuan, isn't that right?" Ziyuan looked at Ruan Hongling with a faint smile on her face and didn't say a word. The two of them looked at each other for a long time. Ruan Hongling's hair stood on end and she looked defeated. She turned to Li Yundong dejectedly and said, "Well, I'll do my work. What do you want me to do?" With a kind face, Li Yundong said earnestly, "That's right. As the saying goes, everyone is born with a talent. Hongling, you are very experienced, clever and hardworking. I'll just appoint you as the artistic director and CEO of the Desanxian store." Ruan Hongling originally had a deep grudge against Li Yundong, but when she heard Li Yundong's flattery she was immediately delighted. She deliberately put on airs and said, "Humph, it sounds good. Who doesn't know that these official titles such as manager and president are as worthless as cabbages?" Li Yundong's face darkened. "Do you want to do it or not? If you don't, I'll let someone else do it." Ruan Hongling immediately replied, "Yes." Li Yundong rolled his eyes at her and said to the little foxes, "You are all shop assistants, future store managers and shareholders." The little foxes were inexperienced in the world, so they didn't know that Li Yundong was just fooling them. When they saw that Li Yundong was serious they felt that they were also great people. They were all beaming with joy as if they didn't have a nose or an eye. Li Yundong tried hard to hold back his laughter and said to Chao Yi and the others, "Sherbua, please be the lobby manager." Chao Yi and the others didn't know what the lobby manager's job was, so they had no choice but to agree to it first in confusion. Li Yundong turned to Ziyuan and said, "Ziyuan, you have contributed the most, and you are also a major shareholder. You can be the general manager of the local Desangxian store." Ziyuan smiled. She didn't expose Li Yundong's tricks. She smiled and nodded without saying a word. Su Chan saw that Li Yundong was talking excitedly, but after a long time he still couldn't talk about her, so she anxiously waved her hand in front of his eyes. Li Yundong only saw a hand waving left and right in front of him. At first he deliberately pretended not to see it, but he didn't expect that after a while, the little girl would be so anxious that she simply jumped in front of Li Yundong and blocked his view. Li Yundong had no choice but to say, "What's wrong?" Su Chan stamped her feet and said, "You promised me that you would give me a good job." Li Yundong pretended to be suddenly enlightened, patted his forehead and said, "Oh, look at me, I almost forgot." Su Chan giggled and said, it's okay. Tell me, what kind of official should I be?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "Alas, at such a young age, all of you are so addicted to being an official." Su Chan said coquettishly, Tell me. Li Yundong had no choice but to say, "Then I'll appoint you as the chief commander of the renovation this time." Su Chan was overjoyed at first, and her eyebrows were almost flying. But soon she thought about it and said, "That's not right. What do you mean by the chief commander of the renovation this time? What about in the future? No, I want to be like them, a permanent official in the local Desangxian store." Li Yundong pinched the little girl's nose and said with a smile, "You fool, didn't I tell you before? If I am the boss, you will be the boss's wife. Isn't the position of the boss of Desangxian not enough for you to show off?" Su Chan was so happy that she didn't care that there were others around. She put her arms around Li Yundong's neck and kissed him hard. Ruan Hongling stole a glance at Ziyuan. She didn't know whether it was intentional or not, but Ziyuan avoided her gaze. Ruan Hongling thought to herself, "This Li Yundong is so heartless. If it weren't for my sister Ziyuan, he wouldn't have been able to run this shop. How could he say such things in front of so many people? It's too much." Ruan Hongling couldn't help but say sarcastically, "Chief Commander? Boss's wife? What kind of position is that?" Su Chan could hear the hidden meaning in Ruan Hongling's words, but she thought that Ruan Hongling was jealous that her position was higher than hers, so she proudly showed off, "Anyway, I'm a higher official than you." Ruan Hongling snorted and said, "What does it matter? Can you say it out loud?" When Su Chan heard this she was dumbfounded. How could she know this? The little girl quickly pulled Li Yundong's sleeve and said eagerly, "Yundong, what do I care?" Li Yundong tried hard to hold back his laughter and said, "Don't you know? The chief commander doesn't do anything. It's the same position with or without him." The little girl stared at him blankly and said, "What about the boss's wife? What does it matter?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Just count the money. How much money you make in the future, just count it." When Su Chan heard this she became happy again. "Then how much can I get?" Li Yundong said seriously, "You can't get a penny?" At this time, everyone finally couldn't help laughing. Su Chan was so angry that she stamped her feet and tears welled up in her eyes. She pulled Li Yundong's arm and said angrily, "How can you be like this? No, absolutely not." Li Yundong laughed so hard that he squatted on the ground, covering his stomach. Su Chan tried to pull him up for a long time but she couldn't. Seeing that Ruan Hongling was laughing so exaggeratedly, she said unhappily, "Then what's your position? Do you know what you're in charge of?" Ruan Hongling snorted and was about to show off proudly, but as soon as she opened her mouth she was a little stunned. She thought to herself, "Art director and CEO? This official title sounds impressive, but what exactly does it do?" Ruan Hongling thought for a while but she couldn't figure it out, so she braced herself and said, "This is Li Yundong's title. Let him explain." Su Chan immediately turned her head and looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes. "Tell me, Yundong, tell me quickly." Li Yundong held back his laughter, stood up and said, "Art President and CEO?" Ruan Hongling and Su Chan nodded at the same time and said in unison, "Yes, what kind of position is this? What's in charge of?" Li Yundong coughed dryly, adjusted his face and said seriously, "This is a little difficult to explain. How should I put it?" Ruan Hongling sneered, "You don't even know what the official title is for? You're really something." Li Yundong didn't even look at her and said slowly, "Let me put it this way. I'll tell you the corresponding specific profession and you'll understand. The meaning of art director and CEO, relatively speaking, is actually carpenters and masons." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone suddenly burst into laughter. This time, it was Su Chan's turn to be proud. The little girl laughed so hard that her waist was like a weak willow in the wind. Ruan Hongling became angry out of shame and shouted, "Li Yundong, I'm not done with you. Yesterday Shanghai Bridge was a mess and it was a mess. The plane was at 6:30 p.m., and I didn't board until 11:30 p.m. It was already past 4 o'clock when I arrived home in Shenzhen. I didn't fall asleep until after 5 o'clock. What a tragedy." Chapter 390. Go to WatchNet. The next morning, Zhao Yuzhen got up early and went to the store he had just bought on the pedestrian street. WatchNet. 7 km. Although Zhao Yuzhen was narrow-minded and arrogant, he was not a fool. When he first met Li Yundong, he was just a little follower of Chao Kefi, very young and inexperienced. But when he saw him again, the boy's temperament was not the same as before, and there was a large group of beautiful women around him. If a man could attract a rich beauty to favor him, then he might be a pretty boy, but if he could attract a group of beautiful women with different temperaments to surround him and obey his orders, then that was not something a pretty boy could do. Subconsciously, Zhao Yuzhen knew very well that Li Yundong was definitely not an ordinary person, but he didn't want to face it. He was more willing to believe that with his own means and strength, he could easily defeat this guy who he disliked very much. But it was not until what happened before that Zhao Yuzhen suddenly became vigilant. How dare this young man speak so arrogantly? What did he have to rely on? After Zhao Yuzhen went back, he carefully checked Li Yundong's background, but he didn't find anything. He was unwilling to give up, so he carefully checked the women around Li Yundong. This time he was shocked. He didn't find anything about Su Chan, Ziyuan or Ruan Hongling, but when he checked Zhou Qin, he was shocked to find that Zhou Qin was the descendant of a high-ranking official. In the land of China, the people did not fight with the officials. In the eyes of the people, Zhao Yuzhen was a great rich businessman, but in the eyes of the officials he was at best a fart. As for whether it was a loud fart or a smelly fart, it all depended on the attitude of the officials. Fortunately, Zhao Yuzhen soon found that Zhou Qin's father, Zhou Kachang, had stepped down. Now he was raising flowers and walking dogs at home. It seemed that he had adapted to the life of a second-line worker and had no intention of making a comeback. Only then did Zhao Yuzhen feel relieved. He thought to himself that it was a close call. If Zhou Qin's backer hadn't fallen, he would have immediately gone to ask for forgiveness. But now that Zhou Qin's backer had fallen, it was completely different. As the saying goes, the tea cools when the person is gone. How much power could an official who was removed from office because of corruption still have? However, Zhao Yuzhen had been in the business world for a long time. He knew that the business world was like the officialdom, and the officialdom was like the business world. He did not dare to be careless for fear that the other party would take drastic measures against him, so he came to the shop in person early in the morning. It was just after 8 o'clock, and there were not many pedestrians on the street. However, Zhao Yogan's shop was already busy. A foreman saw Zhao Yuzhen and immediately greeted him with a smile. "Mr. Zhao, why are you here so early?" Seeing that the shop was in full swing, Zhao Yuzhen nodded, put his hands behind his back, pretended to look around and then said with a smile, "You're quite early." The foreman said with a face full of smiles, "It's all because President Zhao is paying a lot of money, and the brothers are also working enthusiastically." Zhao Yuzhen patted the foreman on the shoulder with satisfaction and said, "Well, if you do well, I still have money. By the way, if someone wants to poach you, you can tell me. I will give you a raise." The foreman felt a little strange, but he still laughed from the bottom of his heart. He said happily, "President Zhao, you are really a good boss. I have been in this industry for so many years, but I have only seen bosses who think about how to deduct workers' money. I have never seen a boss who thinks about how to pay workers more." Zhao Yuzhen was flattered by the foreman, and he felt comfortable. He also said with a smile, "Don't worry, as long as you do the work well, I won't treat you badly." The foreman nodded and bowed. "Don't worry, President Zhao. We will do our best to do your work well." Zhao Yuzhen was relieved. He took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, squinted at him and said, "Want one?" The foreman was flattered. He carefully took out a cigarette from the pack and lit it happily. Then he let out a long breath and said, "I hate that I didn't meet President Zhao earlier. It's really difficult to meet a good boss like you in this world." Zhao Yuzhen smiled noncommittally. He pointed to Li Jiandong's shop and said, "If you were to do the work of the shop opposite, how long would it take for you to finish it?" The foreman suddenly looked a little embarrassed. He thought to himself, "Didn't I work in this shop before? What does President Zhao mean by that?" Zhao Yuzhen saw the uncertain expression on the foreman's face. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, I don't mean anything else. I'm just asking casually." Only then did the foreman feel relieved. He smiled and said, "In my opinion, this shop can't be finished in less than a month, and it can't be open for business in less than 2 months." Zhao Yuzhen asked, "It can be decorated in a month? So fast? Then what about my shop?" The foreman thought for a moment and said, "It will probably take 1.5 months." Zhao Yuzhen suddenly became furious. "What? This bastard shop will only be decorated in a month, but mine will take 1.5 months? Are you kidding me?" The foreman was full of grievances. He thought to himself, "When I heard you say that a month is fast, I thought you thought the project time was too short and suspected that we were cutting corners. Isn't that what you want?" The foreman had no choice but to say, "President Zhao, how long do you want to finish it?" Zhao Yuzhen said angrily, "I have to be faster than them. Do you want me to watch them open before I do? Do you think that a boss like me who earns hundreds of thousands of yuan a second has nothing to do and comes here to open a small shop purely out of boredom? I just want to crush the shop opposite. So, you can decorate slower than all the shops in the world, but you have to be faster than them." Only then did the foreman understand. He thought to himself, "I was wondering why a big boss like him would come to open a tea shop and poach us with a high salary. It turns out that he has a rival. Hey, I thought he would be a long-term boss, but I didn't expect that he would be so addicted to it. I've suffered a loss this time." The foreman regretted it in his heart, but on second thought, since it's done, why don't I extort money from this guy? In any case, it didn't matter where he was, he could do it anywhere else. The foreman made up his mind and said to Zhao Yuzhen, "President Zhao, don't worry. I can finish it in 15 days at the fastest. Worst comes to worst, we can work overtime at night too. But, about the salary then?" Zhao Yuzhen immediately said, "Don't worry about the money. But you have to ensure the quality of this project. If you dare to fool me, I promise you that you won't get a penny left." The foreman immediately patted his chest and said, "President Zhao, don't worry." Only then did Zhao Yuzhen feel relieved. He smoked and looked at the shop in front of him, sneering in his heart. "Humph, you're not even fully grown yet and you want to fight with me? I have hundreds of ways to deal with you in business." While he was feeling proud, the foreman next to him suddenly patted him on the shoulder and said, "President Zhao?" Zhao Yuzhen was immersed in his sweet dream. He shrank his shoulders impatiently and said, "What?" The foreman pointed to the left side of Zhao Yuzhen and said with his eyes wide open, "Look." Zhao Yuzhen turned his head. It would have been better if he hadn't seen it, but when he saw it, his eyes suddenly popped out, and he was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground. They saw a group of young people walking toward them on the pedestrian street, led by a young man. Although he was wearing ordinary gray casual clothes, he was spirited and had an extraordinary bearing. Behind him were more than 10 beautiful women dressed in different clothes. They all had different appearances, but all of them were stunning beauties, causing the passers-by to stare at them with their mouths agape. This group of people was Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, Ruan Hongling, and the fox spirits of the Fox Zen School. The most surprising thing was not their appearance, but the things they were carrying in their hands. Su Chan was carrying a large stack of wrapped snakeskin bags in one hand and a bucket full of pure water in the other. The bucket, which weighed more than 20 kilograms, was carried by Su Chan with one hand as if it were weightless. She was talking and laughing with Li Yundong as she walked. Next to her was Ruan Hongling. She held a bucket of purified water in one hand and carried it on her shoulder. In the other she carried a huge black plastic bag. With every step she took there was a clanking sound. It seemed to be the sound of lunch boxes and chopsticks colliding. The proud beauty of the Linggong sect was full of bad luck. She stared at Li Yundong, who was not far from her, and wanted to smash the bucket in her hand at his head. Ziyuan was also carrying 2 huge plastic bags in her hands. They were bulging and angular, making it impossible to guess what was inside. Behind them were the little foxes of the Fox Zen School and the 3 Sherbua. Each of the little foxes was happily carrying a wooden board that was nearly as high as a person, which even 2 men could not carry. Chao Yi and the others were carrying boxes of tiles that weighed dozens of kilograms. They were all walking as if they were flying, talking and laughing, as if they were about to go on an outing in the wild. Zhao Yuzhen couldn't even close his mouth. The cigarette in his mouth fell on his clothes, burning a big hole in them. The foreman next to him was also dumbfounded. His eyes were blank and he stammered, "My God. What kind of world is this? Am I seeing things? Why are there so many beautiful women doing this kind of rough work?" At this time, Li Yundong and the others had also arrived at the door of the shop. The movement of their group attracted the attention of almost everyone around them. The workers who had been decorating the shop across the street also heard the noise and ran out to see what was going on. When they saw what was going on, they were stunned like everyone else. I've seen people being treated like animals, but I've never seen so many beautiful women being treated like animals. Zhao Yuzhen felt that his brain had almost stopped working. He knew that he was a person who often destroyed beautiful women, but he had never expected that there would be someone in this world who was even more ruthless than him. The foreman finally recovered. He was stunned and said, What are they going to do?" Zhao Yuzhen also said in a daze, "No, I don't know." The onlookers also whispered to each other, secretly guessing the intentions and purposes of Li Yundong and the others. But before long they saw the little foxes stack the wooden boards one by one, then open the bag of tiles and put them in the corner one by one. Li Yundong nodded with satisfaction and then said to Ziyuan, "Ziyuan, when will the cement and sand be delivered?" Obviously, Ziyuan was not used to this kind of situation. Her expression was a little strange as she said, "Probably in the afternoon." "Li Yundong, are you sure you want us to do it ourselves?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Of course. Do you have any objections?" Ziyuan showed a rare expression of a little girl. She curled her lips and rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. "It's too late even if you have any objections now." Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's good that you know. Little foxes. The little foxes love to be lively." When others saw them doing heavy work that even men couldn't do, they thought that Li Yundong was persecuting them. However, they didn't know that the little foxes were all enjoying it. They only felt excited and fun. It was much more fun than cultivating in the mountains or staying at home. When the little foxes heard Li Yundong's shout, they immediately answered in a crisp voice, "Yes." Their shouts immediately made the onlookers burst into tears. They cursed in their hearts, "Damn it, how difficult it is to find a beautiful woman these days. It's not easy to find one, but you hold her in the palm of your hand and you're afraid she'll melt. You keep her in your mouth and you're afraid she'll melt. You keep her at home and you're afraid she'll cheat on you. How difficult it is to have a beautiful wife. Damn it, there are so many beautiful women around him. Not only does he not know how to cherish them, but he even orders them around like servants." It was one thing to order them around like servants, but these beautiful women were all grinning from ear to ear, as if they had taken advantage of the heavens. Damn it, how could there be such a thing in the world? Who the hell is this man? Chapter 391. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong didn't seem to feel the overwhelming resentment around him at all. He said to the little foxes with a smile, "In a while, you will be responsible for cleaning up the things that have been removed from the store. Pack them up and remove them. Do you understand?" The little foxes said in unison, "Yes." Li Yundong handed Chao Yi and the others a note with a smile and said, "You 3 Sherbua will be in charge of logistics. First, go and buy 3 sets of work clothes and a few sets of cleaning tools. Go to." Chao Yi and the others agreed with a smile. Li Yundong then turned his head and said to Su Chan, who was looking at him eagerly, and Ruan Hongling, who was looking at him fiercely, "I have other arrangements for you 2 later. By the way, Chaner, go and get the plastic sheet you brought and cover all the transparent parts of the store. It will be bad if people outside see what we're doing inside." Li Yundong clapped his hands and said, "Let's go. Everyone get to your positions and do your jobs." After that, the little girl responded with a smile and turned to get the plastic sheet. Chao Yi and the others went out of the store and went straight to the mall. The little foxes were busy with some work in the store. "What about me?" Ziyuan asked blankly when she saw that they all had jobs but she didn't. Li Yundong smiled and said, "You'll know when the time comes that you'll be of great use." They were busy in the store. Zhao Yuzhen and a group of renovation workers in his store were looking at them in astonishment. They had no idea what these guys were up to. But after all, the foreman and the others were professional renovation workers. After watching for a while, the foreman said in shock and doubt, "Could it be that they are going to renovate?" Them. Zhao Yuzhen seemed to have heard the funniest and most absurd joke of the century. His mouth was so wide that his fist could almost be stuffed in. He suddenly turned his head to look at the foreman and then pointed to Li Yundong's store opposite. Are you kidding me? A young man who hasn't graduated from the Chinese Department of University, with a group of delicate beauties, is going to renovate? Are you crazy or am I? The foreman had a strange expression on his face. He stammered, "Mr. Zhao, I also think I'm crazy. But what they're doing is obviously decorating." While he was talking, a renovation worker next to him suddenly pointed at Chao Yi and the others who had returned and said, "Look, the big bucket they bought is used to soak the tiles." Zhao Yuzhen saw Chao Yi and the others buy 7 or 8 big red buckets that were as tall as a person and enter the shop. After a while, they put down the things and turned to go out as if they were going to make a second purchase. At this time, Su Chan jumped up and down and covered the transparent glass windows of the shop with an opaque plastic sheet. The onlookers outside could only see the moving figures inside, but they couldn't see what was going on inside. They suddenly lamented, "Beauty, don't cover it up. Let us see. Was this a mosaic? Let's not look at the coded ones." Zhao Yuzhen only felt that his mind was in a mess. Li Yundong's unconventional behavior made him feel like he was falling into a cloud. "No, I have to go and have a look." Zhao Yuzhen suddenly gritted his teeth and walked toward Li Yundong's shop opposite. The foreman was also so curious that he felt as if he had swallowed 25 kittens in one breath. He quickly said, "I'll go and have a look too." Unexpectedly, as soon as he said this, the workers behind him also said, "I'll go too." Zhao Yuzhen suddenly turned his head and glared at the foreman. "Don't you need to work?" The foreman shivered, turned his head and glared at his subordinates. "Don't you need to work?" These workers immediately returned to the shop resentfully and did their work listlessly, but from time to time, their eyes would look across. Li Yundong was in the shop, discussing the layout and decoration order of the whole shop with Ziyuan. Suddenly he saw Zhao Yuzhen push the door open and come in. He frowned slightly, folded the design drawing in his hand, and then handed it to Ziyuan, saying, "Mr. Zhao, what's the matter?" Zhao Yuzhen looked around and asked tongue-tied, "Little brother, what kind of play are you playing?" Li Yundong said faintly, "Can't you see what's going on? It's Nanawan. Mr. Zhao." Nanawan. Zhao Yuzhen was dumbfounded. The foreman next to him reacted quickly. He leaned over to his ear and whispered, "It means that they are going to do it themselves. They will have enough food and clothing." With an exaggerated expression on his face, Zhao Yuzhen cried out involuntarily, "Brother, do you really want to decorate this shop yourself?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "What's wrong? Can't I?" Zhao Yuzhen suddenly laughed out loud, as if he had heard that Yao Ming had turned into a rapper and that Obama was roasting sweet potatoes on the street. He laughed for a while and tears came out of his eyes. Zhao Yogan's laughter was very harsh to the ears of Su Chan and the others. They felt that they had been ridiculed and despised. They looked at Zhao Yuzhen with unkind eyes, waiting for Li Yundong's order to throw him out. Li Yundong was not angry. Instead, he looked at Zhao Yuzhen with a smile on his face, as if he was looking at a monkey playing tricks. After laughing for a long time, Zhao Yuzhen stood up straight, wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and said, "Oh little brother, you are really whimsical. No wonder you are a college student. Amazing. Do you know what the decoration process is?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "So what if I know? So what if I don't know?" At this time, Zhao Yuzhen only regarded Li Yundong as a reckless boy on a whim. There was disdain and contempt in his eyes as he said, little brother, you really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth." Zhao Yuzhen turned around, walked to a wall that had been smashed halfway, and said, "Little brother, I'm afraid it will take you 2 or 3 days to knock down this wall if you want 2 professional decoration workers to do it. Look at you. Where can you find people who can do this kind of rough work?" Zhao Yogan's words immediately made Su Chan and the others furious. They said in unison, "What did you say?" Zhao Yuzhen was shocked. He shrank his head and looked at the little foxes around him in horror. Li Yundong raised his hand and made a gesture to Su Chan and the others, indicating that they should not speak. Then he walked over to the wall, touched it with his hand and said with a smile, "Will this wall take 2 days?" The foreman next to Mr. Zhao came over and said, "Almost 2 days." Li Yundong looked at him and then said to Zhao Yuzhen, Oh? But why do I feel that it can be done in 2 minutes? 2 minutes? Zhao Yuzhen laughed wildly. Young people are really good at bragging. Little brother, you are exaggerating. As he said this, he raised his hand, glanced at his watch and pretended to say, it's 3 minutes to 8:30 now. I'll give you 1 more minute. Let's see how you can do it. Hey little brother, you're boasting too much. I think you. Before Zhao Yuzhen could finish his words, Li Yundong suddenly patted the wall lightly with his palm. Suddenly, countless cracks appeared on the wall with a crash. Then Li Yundong gently patted the 4 corners of the wall. In less than a second, the wall collapsed with a crash. Zhao Yogan's words came to an abrupt halt. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and the foreman next to him almost dropped his jaw to the ground. When Su Chan and the little foxes saw the expressions of Zhao Yuzhen and the foreman, they all felt very happy and burst out laughing. Li Yundong smiled, clapped his hands and said to Su Chan and the little foxes, kids, don't just stand there. Let's get to work. After that, the little foxes responded in unison and swarmed over. When they passed by Zhao Yuzhen, they deliberately bumped into him and shouted, good dogs don't stand in the way. What are you looking at? If you keep looking, I'll dig your eyes out. Get out of here. Humph, now you know how powerful our leader is. Zhao Yuzhen staggered to the door. When he straightened up, he found that some of these young and beautiful women were throwing large pieces of bricks to their partners like pebbles. The partners who caught them quickly put the stones into the garbage bags they had brought. Some of them saw that some of the bricks had not been cleaned up, so they simply pulled them out with their fingers and pulled out the remaining bricks one by one. They worked together like an assembly line. In a short while, the wall was cleaned up and even the gravel was put into the garbage bags and piled up. My God! Zhao Yuzhen only felt that everything in front of him was too unreal. He was dumbfounded and murmured in a daze, am I dreaming? At this time, Su Chan came up to Zhao Yuzhen with 2 huge garbage bags filled with bricks in her hands. She glared at him and said, get out of my way. Don't get in the way. Only then did Zhao Yuzhen come to his senses. He felt a burning pain on his face. He walked out of Li Yundong's shop in a daze and then watched Su Chan easily throw 2 garbage bags, which weighed dozens of kilograms, into the dustbin 100 or 200 meters away. Zhao Yogan's eyes widened as he stared blankly at Su Chan. Isn't this too exaggerated? Zhao Yuzhen even began to suspect that the bricks in the 2 plastic bags were foam. After Su Chan entered the shop, he immediately turned around and ran to the garbage can. He pulled out the plastic bag, picked up a broken brick inside and pulled it hard. This pull almost broke his fingers. Zhao Yuzhen took a deep breath and quickly threw away the brick in his hand. He looked in the direction of Li Yundong's shop in shock. Suddenly he felt a terrible sense of threat coming at him. Under the bright sun he shivered. Although Zhao Yuzhen didn't know what made him so afraid, he clearly felt that he had obviously underestimated Li Yundong. His previous arrogant words were showing signs of becoming a joke. Zhao Yuzhen rushed back to his shop and roared like a madman, everyone work hard. We can't lose to them. I'll give you more money. As soon as these workers heard the money, they immediately became excited and agreed in unison. All of them were in full swing and full of energy. At the same time, Li Yundong, who was in the shop, said to Ruan Hongling with a smile, now it's your turn. Ruan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. If you tell me that you want me to do that kind of rough work, I won't let you off. Li Yundong laughed. He pointed to the thick wooden planks on the ground and said, show me your talent. Let's see what you can make. Ruan Hongling said angrily, how do you know that I can do carpentry? Even if I can, do I have tools? Do I have planes and saws? Li Yundong asked curiously, don't you have your magical item? If you can control that thing as you please, isn't it better than any other tool? Ruan Hongling was tongue-tied and stammered, what? You want me to take the magical item and do carpentry work? Li Yundong said with a smile, yes, I really can't think of anything that your magical item can't carve and make. Only then did Ziyuan understand what Li Yundong was up to. She pursed her lips into a smile and shook her head slightly, thinking to herself, only Li Yundong can think of such a thing. Ruan Hongling looked at Li Yundong as if she were looking at a visitor from outer space. Her eyes were wide open and her gaze was complicated. There was both shock and a trace of admiration in her eyes. She thought to herself, in the entire cultivation world, whether ancient or modern, Chinese or foreign, I'm afraid that he is the only one who uses magical items to do carpentry work, right? If my master knew, he would go crazy. Chapter 392. Go to CNET. While Li Yundong was holding his chin and carefully looking at Ruan Hongling's masterpiece, Su Chan was staring at Li Yundong, covering her mouth with both hands. Her eyebrows were raised, and her shoulders were shrugging, as if she was trying to hold back her laughter. Go to CNET. 7KOM. Ziyuan was also looking at Li Yundong. The corners of her mouth were curled up, and from time to time she couldn't help but smile. However, Ruan Hongling didn't notice it. She was focused on carving on the wooden board with her magical item. Similarly, Li Yundong was also staring at the piece of work that was about to be completed. Seeing that the engraving of the 8 immortals crossing the sea had been carved vividly by Ruan Hongling, Li Yundong couldn't help but exclaim, "Not bad, it's really a work of art. But it seems that there's something missing." "Then why don't you try it yourself?" Ruan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said sarcastically. However, she only glanced at Li Yundong and saw that his head was covered with a layer of white sawdust. If he also had a big white beard on his chin, he would be a living Santa Claus. In particular, Su Chan and Ziyuan were both looking at Li Yundong and snickering. Their expressions made Ruan Hongling unable to help but burst into laughter. As soon as she laughed, she immediately lost control of her magical item and pierced a hole in the wooden board with a click. Li Yundong suddenly shouted, "What the hell? Hongling, how could you make such a low-level mistake in the end? This is the 10th wooden board you've broken. Not counting the 2 you've tried before." Ruan Hongling held back her laughter and said with her hands on her hips, "Please, I'm not a carpenter. You can't ask so much of me." Li Yundong began to regret letting Ruan Hongling do this. He said with a headache, "Didn't you do a good job just now? Why did you suddenly laugh?" As soon as he finished speaking, the little girl couldn't help but burst into laughter. She laughed so hard that her body trembled. Ruan Hongling also couldn't help but laugh. She threw a makeup mirror to Li Yundong and motioned for him to take a look. When Li Yundong saw this, he immediately drove the snow-like sawdust off his head angrily. Then he said to Ziyuan, who also turned around and snickered, "Ziyuan, why are you making trouble with them? I always thought you were reliable." Ziyuan held back her laughter, turned around and said with a smile, "I also thought you were quite reliable until you decided to decorate yourself." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Then what should we do? Now we can't find any renovation workers and we don't know how long we'll have to wait. There's also a group of people blocking our way with the registration funds, and some cultivators hiding in the dark, eyeing us covetously. If we don't do it ourselves, I can guarantee that this shop will have problems every day. The worst thing is that we don't have much money left from the last time we won." Seeing that Li Yundong was a little annoyed, Su Chan quickly held back her laughter and ran over to Li Yundong to help him pick up the remaining sawdust from his hair. Then she said with a smile, "Yundong, we will work hard, but we are not skilled workers. We'll be fine when we are skilled. Look at how we demolished the wall just now. We are very good at it." Li Yundong patted the little girl on the forehead. "You are good at destroying and tearing things down. Besides, I was the one who demolished the wall just now." Su Chan said in a coquettish voice, "Yes, you are our leader. We are doing small damage and you are doing big damage. We will tear down the small ones and you will tear down the big ones." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "If we form a demolition team, the history of China's demolition will be rewritten by us." Ruan Hongling burst out laughing. Ziyuan shook her head and said with a smile, "You'd better think about how to solve the problem in front of you first." After that, she pointed to the wooden board in front of her, which was carved with the 8 immortals crossing the sea map. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "What else can I do? Let's get another one." As he said this, Li Yundong looked down from the 2nd floor and said, "There are still 3 wooden boards left for you to destroy." Li Yundong said with a look of relief, "Fortunately, I am wise and powerful. I bought a few more wooden boards at that time." Su Chan turned her head and said to the little foxes downstairs, "Bring another wooden board up." The little fox, who was closest to the wooden board, threw it upstairs without saying a word. Su Chan grabbed the wooden board, which was as tall as a person, with one hand and put it in front of her. Then she giggled and said, "Yundong, how about letting me do it this time? It seems very fun." Li Yundong rolled his eyes at her. "You, forget it. I guess even if I bought all the wooden boards in Tianan City, it wouldn't be enough for you to play with. Haven't you realized your destructive power yet?" Su Chan pouted and said unhappily, "Of course not. I'm much better now." Li Yundong said very seriously, "Yes, this is also the reason why we haven't been living on the streets yet." Su Chan stamped her feet and was about to act coquettishly when she suddenly heard a vigilant shout from Chao Yi below, "Leader, someone wants to see you?" Li Yundong was stunned and asked casually, Who? Chao Yi said, the jade-faced golden monkey of the Chuanjin dragon sect, Du Fei? Li Yundong was shocked. He looked downstairs and saw Du Fei standing at the door of the shop in a suit and leather shoes, looking at him with bright eyes. Li Yundong nodded to him and said, I'll be right there. After that, he turned around and was about to go downstairs. When Li Yundong passed by her, Ziyuan whispered, if there's a situation, warn me. Li Yundong nodded slightly. He gestured to the people of the Fox Zen school to let them all go upstairs. Then he walked to the door of the shop, solemnly cupped his hands and said, Jinren Du. Du Fei was wearing a black Armani suit with a red tie inside and a pair of custom-made Armani leather shoes. He looked like a business tycoon, not a cultivator who was far away from the secular world. Seeing Li Yundong greet him politely, Du Fei cupped his hands, smiled and said, Jinren Li, we meet again. Although Li Yundong had a good impression of Du Fei, the strong possessiveness Du Fei had shown for Rinyuan Jindan and the heavenly Jindan technique on Mount Gizao had made Li Yundong vigilant. He didn't dare to be careless and asked in a deep voice, Jinren Du, what can I do for you today? Du Fei saw Li Yundong standing firmly at the door like an insurmountable mountain. His expression was solemn and deep, and he was dignified without being angry. He was like a lion guarding its territory at all times. Du Fei secretly admired Li Yundong's bearing and boldness. He looked at the busy pedestrian street and the curious passers-by and said with a smile, Do you want to receive guests here? Li Yundong also smiled slightly. How do I know if you are a guest or not? Du Fei laughed and said, Jinren Li is straightforward. Good. I'm not here to cause trouble today. I'm here to do business with you. Li Yundong slightly moved aside and made way for him. Then I welcome you. Please come in. Du Fei smiled as he passed by Li Yundong. He could feel that many pairs of eyes on the second floor were looking at him curiously and vigilantly. Du Fei raised his head and glanced at them. Suddenly, these eyes disappeared, and the heads that poked out shrank back at the same time. Du Fei smiled slightly. He looked around at the messy shop and said, I heard that Jinren Li wants to open a tea shop here? Li Yundong asked in surprise, How did you know? Du Fei laughed and said, Jinren Li, believe me, as long as you choose to enter the secular world to cultivate, you will have no secrets to speak of. Li Yundong smiled noncommittally and asked, Well, since you are all spying on me, may I ask if you are here to issue a challenge today? A challenge? Du Fei laughed and waved his hand. Don't joke. Jinren Li first defeated the heroes in the Battle of Mount Tianlong, and then you took chestnuts from the fire of Mount Gizao, making so many cultivators of our sects come here in vain. Now, who in the cultivation world doesn't know your name, Jinren Li? Li Yundong smiled and said, That's even more troublesome. As the saying goes, people are afraid of fame as pigs are afraid of being fat. I think there should be many people who want to defeat me and get the reputation of the #1 master of the younger generation in the cultivation world, right? Seeing that Li Yundong didn't deny what had happened on Mount Gizao, Du Fei nodded to himself. He looked at Li Yundong with admiration and said, Jinren Li, I am a straightforward person and don't like to beat around the bush. I can see that you are also a straightforward person, unlike those hypocrites from other sections. Let me get straight to the point. I came here today mainly for a few things. Li Yundong also said straightforwardly, Let's get straight to the point. Good. Jinren Du, please get straight to the point. Du Fei nodded. He pointed out the window and said, Jinren Li, do you know how many pairs of eyes are secretly watching you from outside? Li Yundong said lightly, I don't know, but I definitely know a lot. Du Fei said again, Then do you know who is holding up the registered capital of your shop? Li Yundong's heart tightened, but the expression on his face didn't change at all. He said lightly, I don't know and I don't want to know. Du Fei asked curiously, Why? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, Jinren Du, since you know that someone is holding our necks, it means that you are not only an insider of this matter, but also a bystander. There are only a few reasons why you stand by and do nothing. First, you want to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Second, you want to take the opportunity to threaten us. Third, you want to sow discord and bring the trouble to others so that you can reap the benefits. In view of any of these reasons, I don't want to hear your answer. Du Fei laughed out loud. He clapped his hands and praised loudly, Good. Jinren Li is really smart. It's no wonder that I was defeated by you. As he said this, he suddenly raised his head and shouted to the second floor, Jinren Ziyuan, you have good taste. Jinren Li is skilled in both literature and martial arts. You are really a genius. No wonder you didn't like me back then. The people on the second floor who were eavesdropping on the conversation between Li Yundong and Du Fei immediately looked at Ziyuan in unison. Although she pretended to be calm, her slightly red ears betrayed her embarrassment and annoyance. Li Yundong coughed dryly and said, "Jinren Ziyuan and I are good friends. Apart from that, there is no other relationship. Jinren Du, please don't ruin my innocence. Please tell me something else besides what you just said." Du Fei chuckled and didn't continue to pursue this topic. He thought for a while and said, "Since Jinren Li is not a person who likes to be controlled by others, if I say that I can provide you with a large amount of money, you will definitely not accept it, right?" Li Yundong said without hesitation, "No." Du Fei couldn't help but ask curiously, "Jinren Li, I know that you need money now. Why don't you accept my help? I won't charge you interest and I won't ask you to do anything too excessive. Moreover, you refused me without even hearing the amount of money I wanted to provide you. Don't you feel curious and regretful? This is nothing more than my friendship and sincerity. Why did you refuse it? Have you ever thought about your disciples?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's not a pity at all. As the saying goes, those who are unaccountably solicitous are hiding evil intentions. Although I have met Jinren Du a few times, I believe that the relationship between us is not deep enough for you to help me. Moreover, if I take your money, although you won't let me do anything, I have already owed you a favor. In this world, it is easy to repay a debt of money, but it is difficult to repay a debt of love. If I owe you a favor, how will I repay it in the future? Moreover, my disciples are living a good life. They are eating and drinking well. They are very happy." As he said this, Li Yundong didn't raise his head and said upstairs, "Isn't that right?" Su Chan and the little foxes of the Fox Zen school giggled and answered in unison, "Yes." Li Yundong's face was full of smiles. He spread his hands at Du Fei and said, "Look, the girls are very happy." Du Fei took a deep look at Li Yundong. He quickly glanced at the second floor and said with a meaningful smile, "It seems that Jinren Li is really good at governing. You're amazing. I admire you." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Jinren Du, if that's all you have to say, then I'm going to see you off. As you can see, we are busy." Du Fei smiled and said, "Don't be in such a hurry to leave. Jinren Li, in fact, I came here this time because I have a good deal. I don't know if you are interested." See. Chapter 393. Go to WatchNet. Li Yundong replied casually, "Oh? What kind of deal?" Du Fei saw Li Yundong's lack of interest, but he didn't mind. He just took out a colorful brocade pouch from his pocket and gently untied the ribbon tied to it. Go to WatchNet. In an instant, the seven-treasure brocade pouch emitted a bright brilliance. Du Fei reached into the pouch and took out a yellowed thread-bound book. He held the brocade pouch with one hand and the book with the other. He gently blew on it and then lifted the book with his hand, making it float in the air and face Li Yundong vertically. Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that the pages of the book seemed to be a little damaged because of the age, but the handwriting on the cover was very clear. There were 4 big words. Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook. Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook? Li Yundong read it out softly. Although he had read a lot of ancient books of Buddhism and Taoism, most of them were about cultivation theory. They had almost nothing to do with specific Taoist magic arts and magic items. Li Yundong also knew very well that since ancient times, it had been impossible for Buddhism and Taoism to print real Shintong magic arts and pass them down to the world. Even if there were, it would only be an extremely secret treasure of the sect. Therefore, although Li Yundong had read so many ancient books of Buddhism and Taoism, he still didn't immediately realize what the book in Du Fei's hand was. But soon Ruan Hongling and Su Chan on the second floor poked their heads out at the same time and exclaimed, "Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook?" Su Chan stared at the book and blurted out, "Is it the Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook written by Taoist Benju and his followers in the Ming Dynasty?" Li Yundong tilted his head slightly and asked, "You know about it? Can you explain it?" Just as Su Chan was about to speak, Ruan Hongling rushed to say, "Li Yundong, you are the leader of a sect, but you don't even know about the Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook. Listen carefully. The Illustrated Handbook of Magical Instruments was written by Zhu Qingyong, the king of Qin, the 5th grandson of Zhu Yuanzhang of the Ming Dynasty. He spent more than 10 years with his followers to compile the Illustrated Handbook of Magical Instruments. It recorded all the magical instruments of various sects and schools, as well as their attributes, characteristics, grades, and shapes." Li Yunyang was shocked. He knew that he had suffered a great loss on Mount Gazal because he didn't know the fairy tying rope. Moreover, if a person's magic treasure was not familiar with the opponents, then it was equivalent to having the advantage of being in the dark while the opponent was in the light. Naturally, the opponent would have a great advantage in a fight. Moreover, there were so many Dharma treasures in the world. Su Chan rushed to say, "Yundong, this is Fahai's magical item." Fahai. Li Yundong was shocked. The Fahai in the legend of the white snake? Is there really such a person? He has a magical item that has been passed down to the world? Ruan Hongling also said quickly, Fahai is the disciple of Huaining, the sixth patriarch of the Zen sect of Buddhism. He is also the son of Pei Xiu, the minister of the Ministry of Personnel during the Dazhong period of Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang dynasty. After Fahai became a monk, he made a burning finger oath for the sake of Zixin Temple. In the future, the magical item he carried with him was called the Burning Thumb Pot. Li Yundong looked at the burning thumb pot in Du Fei's hand with a shocked expression. Damn, is this the magical item that's subdued by Suzhin? Du Fei laughed and said, Jinrenli, you must be joking. The legend of the white snake is just a folk legend. Don't take it seriously. Li Yundong also laughed. That's right. In the journey to the west, it was said that Zhu Beiji was Marshal Tianpeng. The two of them laughed, and their vigilance and grudges suddenly dissipated a lot. Du Fei held the burning thumb pot in the air and let it float side by side with the magical implement encyclopedia in front of him. He said, Jinrenli, I won't say much about other things, but since it is Fahai's magical item, it must be very powerful. And I believe that they all know it very well. As he spoke, he pointed to Su Chan and the others who had poked their heads out of the second floor. Li Yundong looked up and saw that Su Chan and Ruan Hongling were staring at the burning thumb pot with their eyes wide open in curiosity and surprise. Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting were looking at the magical item with complicated expressions. They didn't say a word, but Lu Yuehong, who was also a Sherbo of the Fox Zen school, looked at them blankly as if she didn't understand what was so shocking about this magical item. Li Yundong withdrew his gaze, looked at Du Fei and said, Since this is Fahai's magical item, why did it fall into your hands? Du Fei smiled mysteriously. That's a secret of our sect. Jinrenli, if you're interested, you might as well wait for me to take out the third and last item before you ask. Li Yundong saw that Du Fei had taken out two things in a row, one more amazing than the other. He couldn't help but be a little curious and expectant. What would the third item be? Seeing that Li Yundong was tempted, Du Fei smiled proudly and pulled the string of the treasure bag. Immediately, a navy blue hardcover thread-bound book flew out of the bag one after another. Li Yundong saw that these books were coming one after another. Soon they almost occupied half of the hall, piling up like a small mountain. He couldn't help laughing. What is this? Is it the Siku Quan Shu? Du Fei's expression revealed a trace of pride and pride that couldn't be concealed. He opened the first book, then opened it to Li Yundong and said, Jinrenli, please take a look. Li Yundong saw 4 golden characters written in golden seal script on the book. He read softly, Dao Fa Hui Yuan? What? Dao Fa Hui Yuan. Except for Li Yundong, everyone exclaimed in unison and poked their heads out. Ziyuan's expression changed when she heard this. Her figure flashed and she instantly came to Li Yundong's side. She stared at the ancient book in front of Du Fei with her eyes wide open, and her voice trembled a little. This is really Dao Fa Hui Yuan? Is this the Dao Fa Hui Yuan written by Zhao Yizhen at the end of the Yuan dynasty and the beginning of the Ming dynasty? Li Yundong and Ziyuan had been together for a long time. Although he knew that this fairy sometimes lost her composure, he had never seen her so shocked. He couldn't help but be shocked and thought to himself, what kind of treasure is this? How can it make Ziyuan so shocked? Du Fei also knew that Li Yundong hadn't cultivated for long and didn't know much about these things, so he explained, Jinrenli looks. As he spoke, he pointed to the pile of books in front of him and said, There are a total of 268 books here, which record the most glorious period of our Taoism, that is, almost all the Taoist magic and secret history of the Song, Yuan and Ming dynasties. Du Fei pointed to the pile of books in front of him, which was nearly as tall as a person, and said, Here are the 1st to 55th volumes, which are all the Taoist magic of the Qingwei sect. The 56th to the 154th volumes are all the Taoist magic of the Xinshao sect. The 155th to 268th volumes are most of the Taoist magic of the Jingyi sect, the Tianxin sect, the Donghua sect, and the Jingming sect, as well as all the Taoist magic of some small sects. Du Fei's words were light, but for Li Yundong and the others, it was like an atomic bomb had detonated among them. Li Yundong was so shocked that his scalp went numb. He looked at the books in the small room dumbfoundedly and said, You mean that almost all the Taoist magic is here? Du Fei smiled slightly and said, Exactly. Li Yundong was dumbfounded. Since he had reached the Zhuji phase, although he had won every battle, he knew very well that what he lacked the most were Taoist magic skills. But now that he was sleepy, someone had immediately sent him a pillow. This is too exaggerated, isn't it? Almost all the Taoist magic? Ziyuan looked at Du Fei in disbelief. She asked, Hasn't this ancient book been lost for generations? Why is it here? Du Fei said with a smile, It's not here but here in our Chuanjin dragon sect. Since the Tartars entered the pass and the Taoists were suppressed, people have been constantly robbing and destroying this ancient book. For the future of the Taoists, our Chuanjin dragon sect has done everything possible to preserve this ancient book from being destroyed by the Tartars. But in modern times, the Taoists declined greatly, especially during the 10 years of turmoil. Our Grandmaster's bones were dug up, the ancestral court of the Jingyi sect was destroyed, and the cultivation world was almost destroyed. At this time, the leader of our Chuanjin dragon sect decided to transfer the power of the sect abroad, so he dismissed many disciples and let them take away some of the ancient books of the Dao Fa Hui Yuan. After the reform and opening up, the leader ordered his disciples to contact the disciples who had left at that time and reassemble this ancient book. Du Fei said proudly, Since the reform and opening up, all the sects have shown signs of recovery. The Jingyi sect is busy dominating the cultivation world, the Gizao sect is busy refining elixirs, and our Chuanjin dragon sect is busy collecting Taoist ancient books to preserve the bloodline of the cultivation world and do our best. Ziyuan's face was full of solemnity. She cupped her hands in admiration and said, Jinren-du is so broad-minded. I admire you. Du Fei cupped his hands and said with a smile, You're welcome. I'm just a pawn. I don't dare to accept this kind of praise. However, because we left in a hurry, some of the disciples of the sect hid themselves very well all over the world. It took our sect nearly 30 years to reappear in the world. Li Yundong was shocked when he heard this. He knew how huge of a project it would be to find the things that had been scattered all over the world 40 years ago. How much manpower and material resources would it take? Li Yundong couldn't imagine it. He had been quite proud of the beautiful women in his Fox Zen school before, but now he knew what a real sect was and what a real power was. In times of crisis, it could immediately spread its branches all over the world and hide for decades. It was like a divine dragon hiding under the 9 earths, not letting anyone find it at all. This was a sect. When it flourished, it would be able to find the people and things that had been hidden under the 9 earths in the past few decades. Everything would be intact and untouched. This was called power. Moreover, the Dao Fa Hui Yuan that the Chuanjin dragon sect had spent 30 years to collect was actually placed in front of him and wanted to make a deal with him. If such an important thing could be used to make a deal, then what did Du Fei want? Li Yundong looked at the pile of books. He calmed down and asked very seriously, You took out 3 things, one more shocking than the other. What you want must be more important. What kind of deal do you want to make? Du Fei laughed, clapped his hands and said, Jinren-li is really straightforward. Well, I'll be straightforward. I'll exchange the implement encyclopedia, the burning thumb pot, and the Dao Fa Hui Yuan with you for 2 things. 3 for 2. I promise you won't suffer a loss. See. Chapter 394. Go to the net. 3 for 2? Li Yundong's eyes narrowed involuntarily, and 2 sharp rays of light shot out of his eyes. What 2 things? Du Fei confidently raised 2 fingers. Renyuan Jindan and the Heavenly Jindan technique. Li Yundong's heart tightened. He thought to himself, It's really these 2 things? At this time, the Fox Zen school also let out a soft exclamation and sigh. They all knew that the Renyuan Jindan had been taken by Zhou Qin, so it was impossible for them to change it. To watch the net. Li Yundong stared at Du Fei and said, Jinren-du, as the saying goes, don't lie in front of Jinren. We can't make this deal. Du Fei was shocked and his face suddenly darkened. Jinren-li, are you still dissatisfied with these 3 things? Li Yundong shook his head and said, No. Du Fei said in a low voice, Then why do you look down on these 3 things? If there's anything you like, just tell us. As long as our Chuanjin dragon sect has it, or as long as we have the ability to get it, we'll definitely get it for you. Li Yundong chuckled. Not really. Du Fei's eyebrows were tightly knitted together. Then Jinren-li, what do you mean? Li Yundong said lightly, I don't mean anything else. It's just that I don't have what you want. Du Fei's expression changed. Jinren, I show my sincerity to others. Why don't you treat me with sincerity? Are you looking down on me, Du Fei? Li Yundong waved his hand and said, No, Jinren Du, you think too much. Since you treat me with sincerity, I'll treat you with sincerity. Since you've taken out 3 precious items to make a deal with me, I won't hide anything either. Indeed, I was the one who snatched the Renyuan Jindan, and I have indeed practiced the heavenly golden core technique. Du Fei was puzzled and said, Jinren, why don't you want to make a deal? Could it be that you've already taken the Renyuan Jindan? Li Yunyang nodded slowly and said, Yes, but I didn't take it. It was my disciple. Du Fei raised his head, his face filled with unconcealable disappointment and envy. Who is the one with such good fortune? Can I get to know you? Li Yundong smiled and said, She's not here. Sorry to disappoint you. Du Fei let out a long sigh. His expression was extremely disappointed. He lowered his head and didn't speak for a long time. After a long time he took a deep breath and waved his hand, putting away the Dao Fa Hui Yuan, the burning thumb pot, and the magic weapon encyclopedia. Li Yundong looked at the dejected Du Fei and comforted him, Jinren Du, don't be so discouraged. Maybe there is a third Renyuan Jindan? Du Fei forced a smile and cupped his hands. Jinren, you don't have to persuade me with kind words. I think I don't have such an opportunity. He walked to the door with heavy steps, then turned around and said with a forced smile, Jinren, I have a presumptuous request. Li Yundong said with a faint smile, Please go ahead. Can you not teach the heavenly Jindan technique to other sects? Du Fei looked at Li Yundong eagerly and somewhat pleadingly. Li Yundong said, Of course. Du Fei breathed a sigh of relief. A gentleman keeps his word. Jinren, if you have another Renyuan Jindan in the future, you might as well contact me. As he spoke, he took out a gold-plated business card from his pocket. With a wave of his hand, the business card flew lightly into Li Yundong's hand. Li Yundong caught it with both hands and glanced at it, only to see the words Du Fei, President of Asia of Chuanjin Dragon Sect Limited Company written on it. Li Yundong smiled and said, What a magnificent name. What kind of business does the Chuanjin Dragon Sect do? Ever since Du Fei had learned that Li Yundong had taken away the Renyuan Jindan, he had been preparing these 3 things. However, when he finally came to find Li Yundong, it was still a step too late. Especially when he heard that the Renyuan Jindan had been taken, he was a little dispirited. However, out of courtesy, Du Fei still forced himself to say, I'm sorry to make you laugh, Jinren. It's just a small business. However, I am an outer disciple. Although I entered the sect early, I can't enter the inner room and become an inner disciple. Therefore, although I am the eldest Shixiang, my cultivation is actually low in the Chuanjin Dragon Sect. Li Yundong asked curiously, Then how many people do you have in the Chuanjin Dragon Sect? Who are the masters? Du Fei thought for a moment and said, Jinren, this is a secret of our sect. It can't be spread. However, what I can tell you is that there are many masters in our sect, and there are countless people who are more powerful than me. At the Taoist assembly you will be able to see them. Li Yundong understood. He smiled and said, I see, Jinren Du, I won't see you off. Goodbye. Du Fei cupped his hands and pushed open the door. Just as he was about to go out, he glanced around and suddenly stopped. He turned around and said, Jinren, there's something I don't know if I should say or not. Li Yundong smiled and said, Please go ahead. Du Fei gestured at the surroundings with his eyes and said, Jinren, you want to open a tea shop, but as far as I know, there are many people waiting to teach you a lesson on the day of your opening ceremony. Li Yundong laughed out loud. His laughter was so loud that it spread out through the open door of the shop. You want to teach me a lesson? Well, I'm afraid that day won't be lively and interesting. Du Fei smiled slightly and cupped his hands in admiration. Jinren, you are so heroic. I admire you. Du Fei will take his leave now. Li Yundong cupped his hands and returned the salute. I won't see you off. Their actions made many pedestrians and tourists on the street whisper to themselves, What era are they in? Why are they still speaking so politely and cupping their hands? They've watched too many stupid period dramas. They're really crazy. Some cultivators of various sects who mingled among the secular mortals sneered in their hearts when they heard this. They took a deep look at Li Yundong and then disappeared into the crowd. Zhao Yuzhen, who was opposite Li Yundong's shop, also heard Li Yundong's words clearly. He sneered and quickly moved in his heart. Yes, on the day this guy opens his business, if I can make his opening ceremony cold and cheerless, humph, it will definitely cause a big blow to him. Yes, that's what I'll do. If anyone comes to congratulate you, I'll find a way to drive them all away. Even if it's a feast, I'll ruin it for you. Zhao Yujin, who had thought of another way, suddenly felt much more relaxed. He laughed proudly and even hummed a song lightly. In Li Yundong's shop, there was already a commotion. Ruan Hongling shouted at Li Yundong, "Li Yundong, why don't you exchange the Heavenly Jindan technique with him? Use the Heavenly Jindan technique to exchange for Taoist Fa Huiyuan." Li Yundong smiled and said, "The Heavenly Jindan technique is just a kind of cultivation magic of Taoism, but Taoist Fa Huiyuan records almost all the magic of Taoism. You're using a sapling to exchange for a forest. Do you think Du Fei is as stupid as you?" Ruan Hongling was so angry that she was about to speak, but Su Chan beat her to it and said, "Yundong, it would be good to exchange for the manual." Chao Yi also nodded and said, "Leader, anyway you already have the Heavenly Jindan technique. Why don't you use it to make a deal with Du Fei? You can even exchange it for the burning thumb pot. This is a famous powerful Buddhist weapon." Li Yundong laughed and said, "There are some things that I can't exchange for just because I want to. Du Fei clearly wants the Renyuan Jindan and the Heavenly Jindan technique. He won't trade for anything less. If it doesn't work." Li Yundong smiled at Su Chan and said, "I'll use you as a bonus and ask Du Fei if I exchange you and the Heavenly Jindan technique for the 3 treasures with him. Would he trade?" Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong, and her little nose wrinkled cutely. She said coquettishly, "You're so annoying. Are you finally disgusted with me? I'm not a commodity." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Goods don't have legs but you do. You can run back by yourself in the future." Su Chan blinked and looked at Li Yundong innocently. "But what if I don't know the way back? What should I do?" Looking at the cute little girl, Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. At this time, Ziyuan suddenly winked at Li Yundong and whispered, "Li Yundong, I have something to tell you." Li Yundong nodded and went to a corner with Ziyuan. Ziyuan whispered, "Li Yundong, if you have the Renyuan Jindan in your hand, would you exchange it?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "No." Ziyuan asked with interest, "Oh, why?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "It seems that I'm taking advantage of this deal, but in fact it's not." There was a trace of appreciation in Ziyuan's eyes. "Why is that?" Li Yundong said, "Since the Chuanjin Dragon Sect has collected so many Taoist magic, why are they still not a match for the Jingyi school? There are several reasons for this. First, this Dao Fa Huiyuan may be fake. Second, this Dao Fa Huiyuan is not complete. Third, this Dao Fa Huiyuan is real but it is not as powerful as imagined." Ziyuan nodded and praised, "Not bad. You can think of so many things in such a short time. It's really good." Li Yundong also asked curiously, "Since you know these points, why were you so shocked just now?" Ziyuan sighed softly and said, "So far many Taoist classics have been lost, and many Taoist magic spells have been lost. Dao Fa Huiyuan is undoubtedly a great treasure trove of Taoist magic spells. As a cultivator, I was naturally very excited when I suddenly heard that someone had restored Dao Fa Huiyuan. However, what you said before is actually not correct." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then why are you praising me?" Ziyuan smiled and said softly, "It's not like that. Listen to me. There are thousands of Taoist magic spells, but from ancient times until now, no one has ever been able to learn all of them. To be proficient in several great Shintong is enough to be called a great cultivator. As the saying goes, it's better to know more than one. If you learn the 5 Thunder Jade method, it will be enough for you to use in fights. Don't bite off more than you can chew." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Thank you for your advice. Did you come to me alone because of this?" Ziyuan straightened her face and said, "Of course not." She lowered her voice and said, "Did you notice anything strange today?" Li Yundong narrowed his eyes slightly. "What strange thing?" Ziyuan glanced at Chao Yi Zhuang Yiting and Lu Yuehong on the second floor and said, "Didn't you notice that when Du Fei took out the burning thumb pot just now, Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting were very shocked, while Lu Yuehong looked indifferent? After a while, he said in a low voice that only Ziyuan could hear, 'I think I understand what you mean. But now Yen Fang probably knows that we have found her whereabouts, but she still hasn't chosen to escape. This means that she may be deliberately creating chaos between us and making us suspect each other.'" Ziyuan nodded and said, "I think I understand what you mean. But now it's very likely that Yen Fang already knows that we have discovered her whereabouts, but she still hasn't chosen to escape. This means that she may deliberately cause chaos between us and make us suspect each other. Since that's the case, I'll play with her slowly." A cold smile appeared in Li Yundong's eyes. I'd like to see what she's up to. Zi Yuan also smiled and said, I'll keep an eye on her for you. However, there's one more thing I want to talk to you about. Li Yundong asked, what is it? Zi Yuan smiled mysteriously. If you do this well, I believe that she will definitely give herself away. Li Yundong couldn't help but be curious. What on earth is it? Zi Yuan whispered a few words in Li Yundong's ear. Li Yundong immediately fell silent, but after thinking for a while, he raised his head and nodded slightly at Zi Yuan. Okay, but I have an opinion. As he said this, he whispered a few more words in Zi Yuan's ear. Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Li Yundong with appreciation and nodded slightly. Well, I think so too. The two of them looked at each other and smiled, suddenly feeling like confidants. See. Chapter 395. Go to Watch Network. On the afternoon that Li Yundong was busy decorating the shop with Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Ruan Hongling, and the disciples of the Fox Zen School, Zhou Qin finally opened her eyes from an extremely deep sleep. Zhou Qin's slender eyelashes fluttered gently. She lay motionless on the bed, staring at the ceiling with her beautiful eyes, as if she was trying to recall what had happened when she had been meditating in the past few days. But what she thought about the most was not the changes that had taken place after she had taken the Renyuan Jindan, but the fact that Li Yundong had been taking care of her all the time after she had taken the Renyuan Jindan. He had even gently wiped the sweat off her body. Thinking of this, Zhou Qin couldn't help but feel a little hot all over. Her fingers gently brushed across her satin skin, and the place where her fingertips touched felt as hot as fire. Enemy. Zhou Qin bit her lip and sighed softly. She didn't know how much time had passed before she slowly sat up. She placed her hand on the corner of the bedside table, trying to get herself to stand up. But as soon as she did, there was a cracking sound. The leg of the bedside table was broken by her fingers. Zhou Qin was taken aback. She looked at the broken piece of wood in her palm in surprise, as if she couldn't understand it, but soon she understood. All of a sudden she remembered the series of unbelievable things she had seen Li Yundong do. Li Yundong had been bleeding from all 7 of his orifices, smashing the marble countertop with his bare hands, dodging Zhao Yujian's gunshot in the classroom, catching her falling from the sky, and sending the Lincoln limousine flying. At this moment, Zhou Qin personally experienced the feeling of this superhuman power flowing through her body. At this moment she was in a trance, confused and at a loss for what to do. Suddenly there was the sound of voices and footsteps outside the door. Zhou Qin came to her senses. She put on her clothes and walked outside the door, only to see Su Chan and Zi Yuan walking into the house. Su Chan saw Zhou Qin at a glance and shouted with surprise and joy, "Sister Zhou Qin, you're awake?" The little girl had been so busy these past few days that she was a little travel-worn. Her delicate and pretty face was covered with dirt and grime, making her look like a little tabby cat. However, her straightforward and innocent smile did not diminish her beauty in the slightest. Instead, it made her even more adorable. She carefully looked Zhou Qin up and down, nodded slightly and said with a smile, "Not bad, your brilliance is revealed and your eyes are clear. Good good." Zhou Qin didn't know whether Zi Yuan was talking about her current situation or the Renyuan Jindan. She smiled politely and asked, "Where is everyone? Why aren't they here?" Su Chan said with a smile, "We're busy with the decoration of the shop." Zhou Qin was stunned. "Shop? At Sanxian? Are you starting to renovate now? But, decorating you, how did you?" Su Chan looked at herself and also felt that she was like a clay doll. The little girl stuck out her tongue and said with a smile, "We did it ourselves. We just moved the cement and sand so we're a little dirty. Yundong asked me to come back and wash first." Zhou Qin looked at the spotless Zi Yuan in confusion. "Then you?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly and explained, "Yundong was worried about Su Chan coming back alone, so he asked me to accompany her back." Zhou Qin glanced at Su Chan. Before she could show a look of admiration and envy, Su Chan took her hand with a smile and said, "Sister Zhou Qin, you've changed so much. You look like a different person from before." Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. "Is it that obvious?" Su Chan nodded hard, then turned to look at Zi Yuan. "Sister Zi Yuan, what do you think?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Of course. Now Zhou Qin's whole body is full of qi, and her aura is amazing. I estimate that after a few more days of cultivation she can go to the Zhuji phase." Su Chan looked at Zhou Qin enviously. "Sister Zhou Qin, your cultivation speed is really fast. You're even faster than Yundong." Zhou Qin smiled unnaturally. She changed the topic and asked, "Where's Master? Is he also in the shop?" Su Chan said with a smile, "Yes, Sister Zhou Qin, do you want to go to the shop and have a look?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Okay, wait for me to change my clothes." Su Chan also stuck out her tongue. "I'm going to take a shower." After that she rushed into the bathroom. Zhou Qin smiled at Ziyuan. She turned around and wanted to go into her room to change clothes, but Ziyuan stopped her. "Zhou Qin." Zhou Qin stopped, turned around and looked at Ziyuan with a complicated look in her eyes. She didn't talk much with this beautiful woman with an extraordinary temperament. Deep in her heart, Zhou Qin could even accept the innocent Su Chan, but she was a little reluctant to get close to Ziyuan. It was not only because both of them were extremely beautiful, but also because Zhou Qin subconsciously wanted to compete with Ziyuan. No matter what, she was an extremely outstanding woman in all aspects. Obviously Ziyuan was the same. Moreover, Ziyuan was even half a master of Li Yundong in cultivation. This made Zhou Qin feel that when she stood in front of Ziyuan, she was subconsciously half a head shorter. She didn't like this feeling very much. Ziyuan was keenly aware of a strong competitive spirit from Zhou Qin's eyes. She quickly chose to give in. This dignified and gentle woman, who was usually kind and dignified, smiled slightly and said, "It's nothing. Go about your business. I won't disturb you." Zhou Qin gave Ziyuan a meaningful look. She also smiled and went into her room. Ziyuan looked at Zhou Qin's figure and shook her head secretly. She had wanted to ask Zhou Qin what she had been thinking about when she was meditating, but at this time, Zhou Qin showed a sense of alienation, so Ziyuan decided to leave this question to Li Yundong. Ziyuan stood where she was for a while, then turned to leave. But when she walked out of the door and came to the corridor, she saw Li Yundong coming back with the people of the Fox Zen School. Ziyuan smiled and said, "Why are you back?" Li Yundong walked at the front. He laughed and said, "Everything is done. Why didn't you come back?" Ziyuan asked in confusion, "Didn't you say that we were going to lay tiles today?" Li Yundong spread out his hands and said, "The tiles need to be soaked for a while before they can be used. We might as well do it tomorrow." Ziyuan glanced at them, but she didn't see Ruan Hongling. She asked curiously, "Where's Hongling?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Hongling said that when she saw Zhao Yuzhen leave in the morning, there was anger in her eyes. She felt that this guy was likely to take the opportunity to make trouble at night, so she decided to stay there." Ziyuan smiled and said, "No, Hongling has always been careless. How could she pay attention to this? You must have given her some kind of magic potion to make her stay willingly." Li Yundong pointed at Ziyuan and said with a smile, "My parents gave birth to me and Ziyuan knows me best." At this time the little foxes all entered the house together. As soon as they entered the house they began to chatter and shout, "I'm so tired. I'm so tired. Leader, do you have water to drink? Leader, when will we have dinner? Who's in the bathroom? I want to take a bath. Idiot, don't you have a bathroom in your room? But there's a bathtub outside." When Li Yundong saw that they had entered the room, he immediately felt as if he had been drowned out by the noise of a flock of ducks. He raised his hands high and made a gesture to press them down. "Don't make noise, be quiet." As soon as Li Yundong said this, the little foxes immediately shut their mouths and looked at him eagerly. At this time the bathroom door opened with a whoosh. Su Chan rushed out wrapped in a bath towel and her head was covered in bubbles. She said in surprise, "Yundong, you're back?" But as soon as she moved, the shampoo on her head flowed into her eyes. The little girl suddenly jumped up and rushed into the bathroom again. "Ouch, it hurts." The little foxes burst out laughing. Li Yundong shook his head with a defeated expression on his face. He coughed dryly and said, "Everyone has worked hard today. In the evening Jinren Ziyuan and I will cook delicious food to reward everyone." Hooray! The little foxes cheered in unison. Li Yundong smiled and said to Ziyuan, "Jinren Ziyuan, do you have any objections?" Ziyuan said helplessly, "You act first and report later. Why are you asking me?" As she said this she wanted to walk out the door. Li Yundong hurriedly asked, "Hey, you don't have to leave even if you're angry?" Ziyuan looked back and smiled. "I'm going to buy some vegetables." Li Yundong immediately felt relieved. Looking at Ziyuan's graceful and moving back, he suddenly felt that Ziyuan was simply the perfect wife that any man in the world yearned for. It seemed that she would never complain and would only support him silently. But if she is a wife, then what is Su Chan? Such a question popped up in Li Yundong's mind for no reason. He was shocked and quickly shook his head as if he wanted to drive this idea out of his mind. While Li Yundong was shaking his head, he suddenly saw a familiar figure leaning against the door, silently watching him. He turned his head and saw Zhou Qin standing at the door. Her graceful body was leaning against the door, like a weak willow in the wind, making people feel pity for her. Li Yundong was stunned and then said in surprise, "Zhou Qin, you're awake?" After he said this, the whole living room fell silent in an instant. Everyone in the Fox Zen school looked at Zhou Qin in unison, looking at the lucky girl who had taken the Renyuan Jindan. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong with infatuation. Her hands unconsciously tightened in front of her chest and curled up into a ball. Li Yundong didn't notice Zhou Qin's infatuated gaze. He waved to the little foxes and motioned for them to go about their own business. Then he went upstairs and waved to Zhou Qin, motioning for her to enter his room. Li Yundong let Zhou Qin in and then closed the door behind him. He looked her up and down carefully, his eyes full of admiration. He nodded repeatedly and said, "Good, good, good. The qi in your body is even more vigorous than mine before. Very good, very good. By the way, when you were meditating, I reminded you to visualize. Did you do it?" Ever since she had entered Li Yundong's room, her heart had been beating like a drum. She was afraid that Li Yundong would mention the embarrassing scene of him taking off her clothes, but when she saw that Li Yundong was asking about her cultivation as soon as he opened his mouth, she felt relieved and immediately felt a strong sense of disappointment. Zhou Qin sighed slightly in her heart. She cheered herself up and said, "Master, I have visualized." Li Yundong asked with concern, "What is the self-deity you visualized?" Zhou Qin's eyes drooped slightly as if she was recalling the scene at that time. After a while, she said with some embarrassment, "I visualized myself as a fairy." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Then do you still need to visualize?" "You are now." Zhou Qin's cheeks turned red. She stole a glance at Li Yundong and was secretly delighted. She said softly, "I don't know what kind of deity I visualized. Anyway, it was very beautiful and otherworldly. However, there was a sword on its back, a red whip wrapped around its waist, and a silver moon hanging behind its head. It seemed to be the chilling chakram that you gave me, Master." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Yes, this will be your magical item in the future. But after that, I asked you to try to visualize the lotus throne. Did you do it?" Zhou Qin nodded. "Yes." Li Yundong asked again, "How many lotus thrones did you visualize?" Zhou Qin said casually, 9 lotus thrones." Li Yundong was shocked. His eyes widened and he cried out involuntarily, 9? Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong blankly. "Yes, what's wrong?" Li Yundong clapped his hands and laughed. He was overjoyed. "Good, good, good. At that time I also visualized 9 lotus thrones. Su Chan praised me as a rare genius in 100 years. Moreover, Master Feikong also said that the most difficult thing in cultivation is to find a good disciple. I didn't expect that the first disciple I accepted would be a rare genius like me. Ah, this is really amazing." Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong with some amusement. She asked, "Master, are you praising yourself or me?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Praise them all." While he was talking, he suddenly saw the door being pushed open. Su Chan poked her head in and glanced at Li Yundong and Zhou Qin. She asked softly, "Yundong, can I come in?" Seeing that she didn't knock on the door, Li Yundong put on a straight face and pretended to be angry. "No, I'm teaching a disciple." Su Chan suddenly pouted. Li Yundong wrinkled his nose, made a face and retracted his head with a resentful expression. Li Yundong saw that after Su Chan left, he did not close the door. The door was just ajar. He laughed and said in a clear voice, "You little girl, why are you hiding at the door and eavesdropping? If you don't trust me, you might as well come in and listen openly." Su Chan immediately shouted, "Who's worried about you? I'll ignore you. I'll go find Sister Ziyuan and ask her to teach me how to cook." After saying that, the sound of footsteps could be heard, and the little girl ran away like a wisp of smoke. Li Yundong shook his head and laughed. He said to Zhou Qin, "You are only one step away from the Zhuji phase. In the next 2 days, you should build a solid foundation, and then you can prepare to go to the Zhuji phase." Zhou Qin had also read a lot of cultivation books these days. She had more or less understood the Zhuji phase. She also knew that Li Yundong had walked to the Himalayas to build the Zhuji phase. He had polished his Niden Jinshi to be as strong and as hard as iron, which was why he had the invincible power after he had built the Zhuji phase. Zhou Qin asked with some nervousness and yearning, "Will I also go to Tibet?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Of course I will help you prepare the things. You don't have to worry." Zhou Qin asked tentatively, When should I leave? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, in these 2 days. Zhou Qin hesitated for a moment and said, can you wait until the shop opens? I'm a little worried. Li Yundong smiled and said, with us here, what's there to worry about? Zhou Qin just shook her head and looked at Li Yundong with a pleading face, not saying anything. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He thought to himself, could it be that Zhou Qin doesn't want to miss such an important thing? Thinking of this, he nodded his head and said, all right then, I'll teach you some basic cultivation techniques and some magical spells in the next few days. Once you reach the foundation building realm, you can start cultivating on your own. Zhou Qin was overjoyed, and an incomparably bright smile suddenly appeared on her face. That's great. When can I start teaching? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, let's start tonight. Come to my room at 12 o'clock tonight. See. Chapter 396. Go to WatchNet. After having a lively dinner, Li Yundong and the others returned to their rooms to cultivate. WatchNet. 7 km. When it was almost midnight, Zhou Qin, who shared a room with Su Chan, quietly opened her eyes. She looked at Su Chan, who was sleeping opposite her. The usually lively little girl was sleeping like a baby. She was wearing pink lace pajamas and her body was curled up into a ball. She held a pillow tightly in her arms, as if she was always on guard against someone snatching it from her. She was snoring softly through her nose, which made her look very cute. Although Zhou Qin was jealous that Su Chan could win Li Yundong's favor, she really couldn't harden her heart to have the slightest hostility towards this innocent and lovely girl. She gently got out of bed, pulled the quilt for Su Chan, and then quietly went out of the door. In order not to disturb Su Chan, Zhou Qin deliberately did not close the door, but just left it open. But after Zhou Qin went out, Su Chan secretly opened her eyes a little. She also quietly got up and ran to the crack of the door to take a peek. The girl watched as Zhou Qin gently knocked on Li Yundong's door. Li Yundong's magnetic voice came from inside. Come in. Zhou Qin pushed the door open and walked in. Su Chan suddenly pouted. Although she knew that Zhou Qin had gone to Li Yundong's room so late, it was very likely that Li Yundong wanted to teach her cultivation. She was still a little jealous. She wanted to go to the door and eavesdrop on what the two of them would say, but considering that she had been discovered by Li Yundong last time, she rejected the idea as soon as it came to her mind. Su Chan gently closed the door, leaned her back against the door and stared at the ceiling. She sighed with a sad face. Little girl, if you don't behave yourself, I'll really despise you. Su Chan sighed. Oh, little girl. The little girl sat down on the floor, holding her chin with one hand and resting her elbow on her knee. She bent her fingers with the other hand and muttered to herself, look, Sister Zhou Qin has taken the Renyuan Jin Dan again. She will become very powerful in the future. She also knows how to do business, and her calligraphy is not bad. She can help Li Yundong a lot. Sister Ziyuan is the best. She seems to be able to do everything. Li Yundong thought. Sai, why don't I know anything? The only thing I'm good at is calligraphy, but I can't compare to Sister Ziyuan. The little girl sighed in self-pity and pouted, little girl, why do you only know how to make trouble? In the past you could help Li Yundong with his cultivation, but now you can't help him at all. Su Chan thought for a while and suddenly felt refreshed. No, I'd better go to Chao Yi Sherbua and ask her to teach me how to cook. You can't do anything else, but at least you have to know one thing. Thinking of this, the little girl jumped up, gently opened the door and walked out quietly. When the little girl walked to the door of Chao Yi's room, she was about to knock when she suddenly thought of what had happened to them on Mount Gizao. Chao Yi Sherbua was probably Yan Hua who had led them to Mount Gizao. Thinking of this, the little girl suddenly shivered and turned to leave. But as soon as she lifted her foot, she heard a vague voice coming from the room. It sounded like two women were arguing and the voice was vaguely familiar. Su Chan leaned her ear against the door and listened. She vaguely heard Chao Yi Sherbua arguing with another person in a low voice. What are you doing here? Can't I come? Humph, I'm warning you, don't be too arrogant, otherwise, humph. Otherwise what? Hey, go and expose me. At worst. When Su Chan heard this, she suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if someone was staring at her coldly through the door. The little girl quickly straightened up. As soon as she did so, she saw the door open. Chao Yi looked at Su Chan in surprise and asked in a deep voice, Chaner, it's so late. What's the matter? The little girl's gaze quickly followed Chao Yi's back and looked inside. She saw that the window was wide open and the cool wind was blowing the screen. There was no one inside. Her gaze fell on Chao Yi again. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly keenly sensed the deep murderous intent in Chao Yi's eyes. Su Chan shivered fiercely. She opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. At this moment, a loud buzzing sound suddenly came from Li Yundong's room. The little girl had an idea and immediately said, "There's movement in Yundong's room. I want to ask Chao Yi Sherbwa to go and see what's going on." Although there was still suspicion in Chao Yi's eyes, her murderous intent finally subsided little by little. She smiled and said, "Maybe the leader is refining the magical item." The little girl pretended to be suddenly enlightened. She patted her forehead and said, "Yes, Chao Yi Sherbwa, you are so smart. I'm going back to sleep." With that, the little girl slipped back to her room without looking back. As soon as she closed the door, she leaned against the door with her heart pounding. She stared at it and muttered to herself, "How did Chao Yi Sherbwa know that Yundong has a new magical item?" While the little girl was feeling uneasy in the room, Zhou Qin and Li Yundong were in the room, completely unaware of what was happening outside. When Zhou Qin pushed open the door, she saw Li Yundong sitting cross-legged in the room. Behind him was a floor-to-ceiling window with the curtains drawn. A full moon was hanging in the middle of the window, and the moonlight was like water sprinkling on Li Yundong's body, as if it was draping him with a layer of silver cassock. At this moment, Zhou Qin suddenly felt that Li Yundong's whole body was emitting an indescribable ling-qi and qi of transcendence, as if Li Yundong would ascend to heaven in the next second. Zhou Qin stood at the door in a daze until Li Yundong smiled and said to her, "Why are you in a daze? Come in." Only then did Zhou Qin wake up as if from a dream and walk in. After entering the door, she didn't see Li Yundong move, but the door behind her gently closed. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong, who was sitting cross-legged in the room. She took a deep breath, sat down cross-legged and said respectfully, "Master, what are you going to teach me today?" There was an antique sword on Li Yundong's knee. He gently stroked the blade of the sword with his hand and said, "Do you know this sword?" Zhou Qin recognized at a glance that it was the one that Yen Hua had brought to the school last time. She nodded and said, "Yes, isn't this Yen Hua's family heirloom sword?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Yes, but also no. But you must be wondering why this sword is in my hand." Zhou Qin smiled and nodded embarrassedly. Li Yundong smiled and said, "I haven't been cultivating for a long time, but your cultivation time is even shorter than mine. Therefore, compared to you, I'm considered a person who has seen a lot of things. Haha, do you still remember what I told you about Mount Gazao a few days ago?" Zhou Qin nodded and Li Yundong said, "On Mount Gazao, I snatched the Renyuan Jindan and gave it to you. But there is one thing I didn't tell you. At the same time, I also snatched Yen Fang's magical item, the Liuha." As he said this, Li Yundong drew out the Liuha with a clang and gently stroked it with his fingers. Immediately, the long sword made a soft buzzing sound, and the long sword emitted a faint light. Li Yundong said softly, "The jinqi of the original owner of this sword has been completely expelled by me. After that, it was struck by heavenly thunder. I originally thought that it would be broken, but I didn't expect that not only would it not be broken, but it would also absorb a lot of heavenly thunder and become stronger." Li Yundong sighed softly and said, "This is the Bahuang Liuha, the mother sword of the mother-child sword, which is specially for women. However, you don't have the Zhuji phase now, nor do you have a Niden, so you only have Yuanyin and Yuanyang Qi in your body but no Jinqi. You can't make this sword recognize you as its master, so today I can only teach you how to make a magical item recognize you as its master. This is also what Ziyuan taught me back then." As he said this, Li Yundong's Jinqi suddenly gathered into a ball. In the blink of an eye, it rushed to the tip of his finger and then quickly rushed to the body of the Liuha. Zhou Qin stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. At first, she saw that Li Yundong's qi was surging, his hair was floating, and the corners of his clothes were moving without any wind. Sitting opposite Li Yundong, she could feel a strong wind blowing on her face, as if it was going to push her away. In Zhou Qin's opinion, the Liuha did not move at all at first. Li Yundong's jinqi was like a clay ox entering the sea. But after a while, the sword suddenly shook slightly. Then, the shaking became more and more intense, and the Liuha let out a fierce sword cry. This kind of sound was like a dragon's cry and a phoenix's cry. It was clear, passionate, sonorous, and particularly loud in the middle of the night. After a while, the Liuha shook so much that Zhou Qin felt as if there were several Liuha swords in front of her. There were many afterimages on the body of the sword, as if the long sword would fly out of Li Yundong's hand in the next second. At this time, Li Yundong suddenly shouted, "Stop! The Jinchi all over his body surged into the Lioha sword like an avalanche. The Lioha sword, which was shaking violently, suddenly stopped, and many afterimages merged into one in an instant. At this moment, Zhou Qin saw the Lioha sword suddenly emit an extremely dazzling white light. She subconsciously covered it with her hand. At this moment the room was as bright as day, and then the light immediately disappeared, and the whole room fell into darkness. After Zhou Qin put down her hand, she stared at the Lioha sword with wide eyes. She saw that the sword, which was about 1 meter long, was flowing with a faint silver light, and its whole body was exuding a mysterious and quiet aura. Li Yundong smiled and looked at the Lioha sword. The Lioha sword did not fall down. It floated in the air like a newborn baby, looking around curiously and vigilantly. After a while, it suddenly turned and pointed at Li Yundong, looking like a tiger eyeing its prey. Zhou Qin only felt that the sword chi of the Lioha sword was sharp and threatening. Although the sword was not facing her, she still felt a chill down her spine. Seeing that the tip of the Lioha sword was pointing at Li Yundong, Zhou Qin couldn't help but cry out worriedly, "Master Yuk?" Li Yundong raised his hand and stopped her with a smile. He shook his head gently at her and said softly, "It's okay. It can't hurt me." As if to confirm Li Yundong's words, the Lioha sword suddenly jumped up and shuttled around the room happily after looking at him for a while. Zhou Qin only heard the whooshing sound of the long sword in the room. The speed of the Lioha sword was so fast that she couldn't keep up with it with her naked eye. She could only see a few silver lights rolling back and forth around her. After a while the Lioha sword suddenly stopped. The silver light in the room disappeared, and the shining sword stopped behind Li Yundong with a buzzing sound, looking around arrogantly. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Magical items are psychic, and among all magical items the most psychic is the sword. Don't underestimate this long sword. It has its own thoughts. Just now it was trying to determine whether I am its master or not." Zhou Qin's face was full of shock. She was tongue-tied for a long time before she exclaimed, "It turns out that there really are sword immortals in this world. There really is such a thing as flying swords killing people." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "It's incredible, isn't it? Someday I'll ask Ziyuan to tell you about the story of the Lioha sword, how these magical items are made, and where their principles come from." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Master, I want you to teach me." Li Yundong said curiously, "Ziyuan knows more than I do." Zhou Qin shook her head and said, "No matter how much she knows, she's not my master." Li Yundong gave Zhou Qin a meaningful look. He nodded and said, "Well, you can go back to your room to sleep in a while. Don't go to the store with us tomorrow. Cultivate well at home." Zhou Qin opened her mouth to say something, but Li Yundong raised his palm and said in a deep voice, "There's no room for negotiation." Zhou Qin didn't insist anymore. She was a strong and domineering woman, but no matter how strong and domineering a woman was, when she met the man she loved deeply, she would always show her soft side. She smiled helplessly and said, "Well, master, don't be too tired." Li Yundong had indeed consumed a lot of jinchi to make the Lioha sword recognize him as its master. At this time his face looked a little pale. He smiled slightly and said, "I'm fine. You can go to sleep." Zhou Qin left Li Yundong's room. After returning to her own room, she stole a glance at Su Chan. She saw that the little girl had turned over and was facing the wall, her body still curled up into a ball. Zhou Qin smiled slightly and got into bed, but her eyes were wide open. Li Yundong's handsome figure in the moonlight seemed to be swaying in front of her eyes, making her not feel sleepy at all. Su Chan, on the other hand, stared at the snow-white wall with her eyes wide open. Her beautiful eyes flashed with doubt, vigilance, and a trace of wisdom and cunning. The two beautiful girls lay on their respective beds, each thinking about their own things. They tossed and turned, unable to sleep all night. See. Chapter 397. Go to WatchNet. The next morning, when Li Yundong walked out of his room, he found that the living room was already full of people. The little foxes were ready to set off early. Ziyuan was quietly reading a book in a corner of the sofa. Chao Yi, Zhuang Yiting, and Lu Yuehong were gathered together, whispering to each other. Su Chan, who usually liked to laugh with the little foxes, was sitting alone in the dining room, slowly drinking porridge while her eyes darted around. Go to WatchNet. When the little girl saw Li Yundong, her face immediately lit up with joy. She jumped up, wiped her mouth with her hand, and was about to throw herself into Li Yundong's arms with a smile. Li Yundong looked at her hands that had wiped her mouth and said with a smile, "Hey, don't wipe your hands on me." Before the little girl could hug Li Yundong, she was stopped by him. She looked resentful and said, "You're so annoying. I just want to hug you." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Yes, wipe your hands by the way." Su Chan stuck out her tongue and said, "You found out." Li Yundong tapped Su Chan's nose and scolded her with a smile, "Don't you think I don't know how many intestines you have in your stomach?" While the two of them were laughing, Lu Yuehong, who had been silent all this time, suddenly asked with a smile, "Leader, there was a lot of noise in your room last night. What were you busy with?" Li Yundong turned his head with a smile and said, "Nothing. I recently subdued a new magical item." Lu Yuehong smiled and said, "Really? This is going to be an eye-opener." The little foxes also chattered excitedly, "I told you last night that Leader was collecting magical items, but you didn't believe me." "Humph, who doesn't believe me? We were just guessing what kind of magical item Leader was collecting." Li Yundong ignored the little foxes who were whispering to each other. His eyes inadvertently met Ziyuan's, and then he quickly looked away as if nothing had happened. He said with a smile, "Well, it's good for everyone to have a look." As he said that, he didn't move. Suddenly, a 3-foot-long sword jumped out from behind him. The body of the sword was engraved with sword patterns, and a red sword tassel hung from the hilt, giving it an antique feel. When Chao Yi saw the long sword, her expression did not change, but a sharp light flashed in her eyes. Zhuang Yiting, who was next to her, moved her face slightly, showing a very surprised look. Lu Yuehong was the most surprised. She cried out involuntarily, Is this the Lioha?" "Lioha!" The little foxes exclaimed at the same time and gathered around the Lioha to see what it was. The Lioha sensed the demon aura of the little foxes and immediately flew up. The edge of the sword trembled slightly, pointing at the little foxes with vigilance and hostility. The little foxes were so scared that they screamed and immediately retreated in all directions. Li Yunyang chuckled and waved his hand. The Lioha instantly flew back behind him and disappeared. Only then did the little foxes gather in the living room again, still in shock. They looked at Li Yunyang with awe and whispered, "Leader is so powerful. He has another great magical item. Yes, it would be great if we could get the Bahuang sword too. I don't know when Leader got the Lioha." "Stupid, ask the sect leader." "Yes, let's ask the sect leader." Li Yunyang saw the little girls whispering to each other for a while, and then suddenly rushed over like a tide. He quickly took 2 steps back and pointed at Su Chan. "If you have something to ask her, she knows." The little foxes rushed over to Su Chan like a tide, surrounding her like stars surrounding the moon, waiting for her to tell the truth. The little girl raised her head proudly and said, "It's a long story." Seeing that Su Chan was keeping them in suspense, the little foxes hurriedly urged, "Shimi Su Chan, ah no, Shiji Su Chan, can I call you Shiji? Tell me quickly." "That's right, Sister Su Chan, tell me quickly." Su Chan's seniority in the Fox Zen school was very low, and she had always been the one to call others sister. Today, a large group of people suddenly called her sister. The little girl laughed so hard that her nose and eyes disappeared. "You want to hear it? Then don't quarrel." Seeing that the little girl had begun to tell the story proudly, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and shaking his head. He said to Chao Yi Ziyuan and the others, "I'm going to freshen up and then go out." When he finished freshening up, the little girl was talking about the embarrassing scene of them coming to Mount Gazao and being forced to show up by Yanhua. However, they had inadvertently forced out other people from various sections. The little foxes were listening carefully, and when they heard this part, they suddenly burst out laughing. Li Yundong glanced around and saw that Lu Yuehong was covering her mouth and laughing. Although Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting were also laughing, their smiles were a little unnatural. Li Yundong felt strange in his heart. It's normal for one of Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting to behave strangely. Why are both acting a little strange? Li Yundong's gaze lingered on Chao Yi for a little longer. Chao Yi seemed to sense his gaze, so she turned her head and said with a smile, "Leader, what's the matter?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's nothing. Let's go." The group of people chatted and laughed as they went out. The little girl was very eloquent, and she vividly told them what had happened on Mount Gazao that night. The little foxes sometimes exclaimed and sometimes held their breath, not daring to breathe too loudly. It wasn't until they arrived at the pedestrian street that Su Chan finally told them what had happened. After hearing this, the little foxes sighed and began to chatter. One of them asked Su Chan in confusion, "Su Chan, how did you meet Leader and Jinren Ziyuan that night?" Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head and looked behind him. Coincidentally, Ziyuan was also looking at him. Their eyes met and then fell on Su Chan at the same time. Su Chan rolled her eyes and said with a smile, I was bored in my room at night, so I went out for a walk to get some fresh air. Then I ran into them. When Li Yundong heard this, he laughed in his heart and thought, hey, this little girl has actually learned to lie, and her face doesn't change at all. Li Yundong's eyes quickly swept over Chao Yi and the others, but he didn't see anything unusual about them. He frowned secretly and was about to speak when he suddenly saw the little girl pointing ahead in surprise and saying, what's going on there? Li Yundong and the others looked forward and saw that in front of the pedestrian street, there were 3 layers of people inside and outside. A group of people was pointing at the scene, and that place was where Li Yundong's Desangxian was. Li Yundong's heart tightened and he thought to himself, could something have happened in the store? Where's Ruan Hongling? Could something have happened to her? Li Yundong immediately stepped forward and pushed through the crowd. As soon as he squeezed through the crowd, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He saw 7 young men kneeling in the field, each of them holding a wooden sign in their hands. Judging from the situation of the onlookers outside the field pointing at the wooden sign, it seemed that there were words written on it, but these people had their backs to Li Yundong so he couldn't see the specific words clearly. Ruan Hongling was in front of them, sitting on a pile of red bricks, pointing at them and saying, hey, the order in which you lined up is wrong. Change it again. Why is it still wrong after changing it so many times? Your powers of comprehension are too poor. I've seen you line up in an S shape all night and then AB shape. Tell me, how can I let you go when you line up like this? The leader of the gangsters said with a sad face, Beauty. As soon as he opened his mouth, Ruan Hongling glared at him, threw a small stone at him and shouted, what did you call me? Grandma, Grandaunt. The gangster was hit so hard that his body bent over, and the sign in his hand fell to the ground with a bang, revealing a painted Li character. The gangsters next to him immediately craned their necks to take a look, then quickly winked at each other, stood up in unison, adjusted their positions and knelt down again. Suddenly the surrounding people burst into laughter and whispered to each other. Who is this Li Yundong? I don't know, and I don't know how this guy offended this wild beauty. Alas, I've watched too many Korean movies and there are more and more wild girlfriends. It's terrible. TSK. Li Yundong's face was full of strange. He quietly moved in front of these gangsters in the crowd. He only took a glance and suddenly became angry. He saw that the gangsters were holding a sign in order, Li Yundong, you bastard. The last person was holding up a bright red exclamation mark. Li Yundong was so angry that he rushed to Ruan Hongling angrily, lowered his voice and shouted, hey, what's wrong with you? What's going on here? Ruan Hongling had already seen Li Yundong at a glance, but she deliberately pretended not to see him. When Li Yundong couldn't help but rush in front of her, she pretended to recognize him and said with a matter-of-fact expression, didn't you see? I caught a few little thieves who came to make trouble at night, and then I painstakingly persuaded and educated them. I told them why I was here so late and also told them who let me be here. Ruan Hongling stood up, pretending to be innocent and said to Li Yundong, then I asked them, do you think this Li Yundong is a bastard? They nodded their heads desperately to show their agreement. Alas, the great man said, the eyes of the people are as clear as snow. What do you think? Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed. He pointed to the sign in the hands of these guys and said, well, you win. Then why did you make them do this? Ruan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. What? What else can I do? Play. Otherwise, what else do you want me to do in the long night? Li Yundong was tongue-tied. Are you playing? Ruan Hongling suddenly showed a mischievous expression. She pointed to the sign held high above the heads of these gangsters and said, of course I gave each of them a sign, but I didn't tell them what was written on it. Then I let them rank it themselves. If it's not right, they can rearrange it. When it's right, I'll let them go. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I give up. Well, now it's finally right. Let them go quickly. Don't you see how many people there are here? Do you want the police to come? Ruan Hongling snorted and said to the gangsters, hey, you're right. Look up and have a look. These gangsters had obviously been fooled by Ruan Hongling all night. None of them dared to look up. They just shook their heads vigorously. Ruan Hongling laughed and scolded, a group of idiot cowards. I'm not lying to you this time. Look up. The leader of the gangsters saw that Ruan Hongling didn't look like she had lied to them several times before, so he boldly raised his head. Seeing that someone had taken the lead, the gangsters also turned their heads to look at their own signs. It would have been better if they hadn't looked at it, but when they saw it, they immediately said angrily, damn it, who the hell is this Li Yundong? How could he make me so miserable all night? When I see him, I'll beat him to death sooner or later. Ruan Hongling laughed so hard that she covered her stomach and almost rolled on the ground. Su Chan and the others also laughed hard. Even Ziyuan couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle. Li Yundong walked up to these gangsters, kicked the talking gangster in the butt and said with a black face, "I am Li Yundong. What do you want?" The gangsters were shocked. They hadn't expected that the man they had been cursing the whole night was standing right in front of them. They were all stunned for a moment and stared at Li Yundong, speechless. Ruan Hongling, who wanted to see the world in chaos, tried hard to hold back her laughter and said, "Hey, the person has appeared. Revenge." These gangsters were not stupid. They had seen the way Li Yundong and Ruan Hongling talked before. Obviously they were friends and they were very close. Ruan Hongling had taught them a lesson all night, so how could they dare to act rashly? The leader of the gangsters said shamelessly, "Brother Li, no, Master Li. May I ask where you are from?" The leader of the gangsters said this just to be polite, so that he could explain to his brothers in the future. However, Ruan Hongling said, "You don't even know him? Are your eyes blind? Take a good look at his name." The leader of the gangsters stared at the sign in his hand with the big Li written on it, and then asked tentatively, "Master Li, is your father Li Gang?" As soon as this sentence was said, the crowd around them suddenly burst into an uproar. They all pointed at Li Yundong and whispered to each other, including Eric. Li Yundong glared at Ruan Hongling angrily and said, "Let's see how you deal with this." Ruan Hongling snorted and said with a look of indifference, "Watch me." Then she put her hands on her hips and shouted to the crowd around her, "Did you hear that? His father is Li Gang. If you're not afraid, stay. If you're afraid, leave. Otherwise you'll die." The crowd immediately scattered in all directions like birds and beasts. Even a few gangsters scrambled to escape with the crowd. In an instant, only Li Yundong and the others were left, like a few bare stones on the beach after the tide had receded. Ruan Hongling spread her hands and said proudly, "See, it's very useful." Li Yundong glared at her and said, "You played a little too much this time." Ruan Hongling glared back at him without showing any weakness. "Who told you to leave a weak woman like me here to look after the shop? It's like a ghost shop. Do you want to scare me to death?" Li Yundong laughed angrily and said, "You can be scared by ghosts? If a ghost sees you, it's good enough that it won't be scared to death. Are you kidding me?" Seeing that the two of them were about to quarrel again, Ziyuan was about to step forward to mediate when she suddenly heard a noise and a burst of footsteps not far away. Li Yundong and the others turned their heads in the direction of the sound and suddenly saw a group of people rushing over like a tsunami. A woman among them shouted, "Where is he? Where is Li Gang's son?" Another earth-shattering voice came from the crowd. Over there, over there." Li Yundong was stunned and felt a headache coming on. He stammered, "F***CK, isn't this too exaggerated? How can we end this? Last week, I ranked 7th on the top flowers list. This week, I updated 4 times, 2,467 respectively. In addition, let me rest for 7 days during the new year. I don't need to vote for flowers this week. I'll vote for the children who need it. Next week is the new year. I'll rest for a week, but there will still be 2 updates every week. I hope my readers can understand. Thank you very much. See that you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.